Chapter 15, Incompetent Shiki, Ruko and Ri arrive. What, are you saying she is a dud? Ko slammed her fist down on the hardwood of the table. Mitsuru and Chi giggled at Arata and Shig's incompetence. Forgive us, madam, we thought she was going to rise. Ran said she could sense Jinru in her blood. Ko cut Shig off. Ko looked at the Shiki woman with hatred-filled, red and black eyes, the eyes Ko usually didn't have on. Ran will be punished severely, but you on the other hand, Shig and Arata, you two will not venture out for 2 whole nights. Shig and Arata's eyes opened wide and started pleading. No, how will we feed then? We need our dose of blood, Arata pleaded. Ko smirked like the mad woman she was. You will starve for 2 whole nights. Now go to the punishment area and start starving. Ko screamed at the Shiki as they walked to the dungeon, with sorrowful eyes and drooping arms. Ko relaxed herself, looking down at Yukiko's body, rolling her eyes. Need any help? Ko's eyes widened and looked at the couch where the voice was coming from. A Shiki with punk-styled clothing was laying on the couch, looking at Ko with eyes full of care, kinda like how a big sister looks at her younger sister. Ruko, how did you find us? Ko demanded to hear the answer from the Shiki woman. Ruko smirked and looked at Ko with slanted eyes, filled with happiness. A sister always finds her younger sibling. Ruko chuckled to herself as she looked at Mitsuru and Chi, who had mouths in wide smiles and eyes wide with glee. Andy Ruko, the 2 girls yelled in unison as they began flooding Ruko with questions. I missed you girls more than anything. Ruko smiled as she looked at Ko. I see you demand a Shiki that has more of a qualification than those simple-minded ones. Ruko asked Ko, who hung her head. Yes, the incompetent fools give me a dead body that won't rise and complain to me that she will rise into a Jinru. Ko pointed to Yukiko's lifeless body. Ruko laughed. Really? They are more stupid than I thought. Ruko smirked happily, running her hand through her air-blown, dark aquamarine hair. Andy Ruko, can you help us out? She asked with large eyes. Ruko smiled. A member of the Inoshiki family always helps out. Ruko smiled. Mother, Andy Ruko, let's go have some fun with Ran, she said with a smirk, and they followed the kimono-wearing young girl. Looking back at Yukiko's body, Ko rolled her eyes again and closed the door to the living room and locked it. In the darkness, one of Yukiko's fingers twitched slightly. Daylight shined on in the beautiful blue sky. Mitsuo and Yutaka were going through notes about Shiki, thanks to Kurayami, who visited them this morning. Kurayami tells us not to trust her, but she still helps us out. I don't get it. Yutaka scratched his red and white hair with confusion stamped on his face. Me neither, but we have to try to stop what's going on, Mitsuo said as he looked at his book. Information scribbled all over the pages. And over here we have the Sotoba Shrine. This shrine is important to us, and thus is why Hiroko's family takes care of it. Mitsuo and Yutaka looked to see Akihiro talking to a girl who had beautiful, bright blue eyes and long gold pigtails which reached to her knees. Akihiro, who is that? Mitsuo asked his orange-haired friend, who smiled. This is Rimatsumi. She is from Yamari and is known to be Princess of Yamari thanks to her winning that recent Pendant Girl Championship. Mitsuo remembered the championship. It was October 28th. The Pendant Girl who wins in July gets a tour of Sotoba, Mizobi, and Yamari. The 2 areas always have these pendant matches, always trying to get tourists to venture into the areas. Sotoba's girl this year was Chio, who cried with defeat when she didn't win. Ri seemed kind and gentle compared to the wrathful Chio who would kill to get what she wanted. Perhaps now she would do such. Hi, it seems you are a friend to my tour guide here. Papa wanted me to get a guide to show me around Sotoba, Ri said as she waved at Yutaka and Mitsuo. Yeah, well anyways, welcome to Sotoba Rimatsumi, the Princess of Yamari. Mitsuo bowed before the young girl who gave an innocent giggle. Thanks, you are too kind. Ri put her finger on her chin and Mitsuo smiled. Mitsuo Nataga. This guy here is Yutaka Kai. Mitsuo introduced themselves to Ri, who smiled. Well, Mitsuo, can you boys recommend me a motel around here? My father has business duties to attend to in Sotoba. Do I may stay for a week or 2 here? Ri smiled as Mitsuo thought carefully. There is always the Tsukahara Motel. It's a nice motel close to the road by the Ozaki Clinic. It's ran by Mko's cousin, Mariko Tsukahara. Yutaka whispered to Mitsuo, who smiled and looked at Ri. The Tsukahara Motel is pretty good from what I heard. Mitsuo smiled to Ri and she happily clapped her hands. Perfect. I shall stay there. Ri grabbed Akihiro's arm and dragged him away to go find it. Be careful. Mariko is obsessed with steampunk. She may slip you into a steampunk-inspired outfit. Yutaka yelled out to Ri, who waved in reply. She is into steampunk like Mko? Mitsuo cocked his head while Yutaka sighed. Steampunk runs in their family. Yutaka smiled as the two drifted to their notes. Chapter 16, Death in the Clinic and the Inn. Kyoko was in critical condition, sir, Miss Kaoru Yamahata announced to Hotaka. He couldn't lose Kyoko. What would he say to Shino and Tatsuzo? Kyoko worked all the time at the clinic and was one of their prized members. The clinic would be empty without her cheerful personality and fun jokes. How about Naoki? Is she still alright? Hotaka yelled to the doctor. Naru Fukushima. Mr. Fukushima shook his head. She be gone, my boy, said Mr. Fukushima with sorrow in his eyes. Hotaka cursed under his breath. His fiancée was dead. Doctor, Kyoko muttered and then went still. Hotaka looked at the meter and saw the line was straight. Kyoko died too. Kyoko, Naoki, arg! Hotaka screamed in frustration. He pounded his fist into the wall. His knuckles were dripping with blood from fresh cuts and scrapes. Hotaka looked behind him to see the nurses and doctors stared at him with wide eyes before he returned to his relaxed state. I will tell Shino and Tatsuzo the news. Miss Yamahata, call Naoki's parents. Miss Yamahata nodded and raced to the nearest phone. Hotaka exited the room. His pace was getting slower and slower as he reached the waiting room, where Tatsuzo and Shino were waiting. He opened the door and saw Tatsuzo and Shino stood up and out of their chairs. Their eyes were wide and awaited good news for their friend. How is Kyoko, Mr. Ozaki? Shino asked with wide amber eyes. Sorry kiddos, but she is gone now, Hotaka said, and he watched Shino put her hands on her mouth and slowly fell to the ground, eyes wet with tears. What was the cause of death? Sir, Shino asked through a voice filled with muffled sobbing and hissing sounds. She had anemia, an infection through strange bug bites, possibly mosquitoes. She also fell into cardiac arrest and soon died from heart failure. Everyone says she died because of the conditions of being outside. Hotaka looked at Tatsuzo, who had an expression full of sorrow, eyes dark. Kyoko was found just 2 days ago, lost in the forest and was taken back home. She had been bitten by insects and was freezing thanks to the cold temperatures thanks to it being October 30th. Kyoko was taken from the clinic the same as Naoki being taken from Hotaka. We are leaving, Mr. Ozaki. We are going to tell Kyoko's parents and arrange a burial service. Tatsuzo stood up and faced the doctor who nodded in agreement. Oh, one more thing. Shino suddenly handed Hotaka a letter. It had the labeling, to Hotaka, from Kyoko, written on it. Hotaka was surprised to see this note. It was a note beside Kyoko's bed. We thought she would have wanted it taken to you, Shino said as she grabbed her leather jacket and walked out with Tatsuzo. Hotaka was curious and ripped the top of the letter roughly, wanting to know what it said. He came to a message, written to him from Kyoko. Dear Dr. Ozaki, I am resigning from my post as nurse. I may have acted like I loved the clinic, but honestly, I couldn't stand it. Hearing about the epidemic, I just had enough. I know I will die eventually, but I don't want my death early. Sorry, but I am quitting before death takes a hold of me. Signed, Kyoko Iba. Hotaka's eyes were wide. She was resigning, but she always loved working at the clinic. Even after work, she still talked about her love for helping everyone. Hotaka was puzzled, unable to wrap his head around it. Maybe she was scared that the epidemic would catch her like it did now. Hotaka set the letter on the desk, returning to work. Chio walked along the pavement of the cold streets of Sotoba. Alongside her was a teenage girl with flashy clothing and pale skin. Hera, I am glad you rose. I knew you were special, unlike the measly Sotobians that are maggots underneath us. Chio smirked as her Shiki companion smiled a devious smile. Becoming Shiki is the best thing in my entire life. Hera Yukimura smiled as they talked while looking for an ectobite. They were immortal, beautiful, and deadly, looking for their next target with hungry black and red eyes. Chio, I heard that tree girl who won the pendant match against you is here. Wanna have a bite with her? Hera suggested with a sinister smirk which was returned to her by Chio. Of course, I will give her a nice gift. Chio sinisterly smiled as she and Hera walked towards the inn which proudly belonged to Muko's cousin, Mariko Tsukahara, a steampunk fanatic who is never afraid of what people think of her or her silly inn. Pathetic, Chio said through gritted teeth about Mariko. Sadly, Mariko was not in the inn. If she was, Chio would have sent Hera after the steampunk-loving moron. Chio, over here. Hera beckoned her friend to a window, which Chio glared inside. Smirking, Chio found the sleeping form of Rimatsumi, the girl who won. Now, how to get in? Chio saw the window was opened, but she couldn't just crawl in. She needed an invitation from the owners in order to waltz right in. Chio bit her lip, looking around for a plausible way for her to get in. The whole village knew her face, and if they seen her walking around, the Shiki secret would be blown. The dirty blonde Shiki looked inside to see glimmering red irises in the dark corner of the room. Chio smiled wide after realizing it was Ruko Inoshiki, Ko's elder sister. Ruko came to the inn late last night and rented a room. She had free access to the inn whenever she wanted. Ruko walked towards the moonlight and faced Chio. A kind smile appeared on her lips. Ruko picked Ri up in a damsel in distress way and handed the blonde girl to Chio. "Here you are, sweet pea." Ruko smiled and Chio sank her fangs into Ri's delicate, light skin. Ri's blood was draining, the flavor dancing on Chio's lips. Chapter 17, The Hidden Shiki. "Darn it, I lost again," Mitsuo screamed in the log cabin where the Shiki hid. Madoka and K were playing a game of Sorry. In the area, only the glimmering light of a flashlight allowed Mitsuo to see. "Sorry Mitsuo, I win." Madoka smiled, her red and black eyes held a proud expression. "We've been practicing every time we could," explained. Mitsuo, despite being a human and with a room full of Shiki, felt undeniably safe around K and Madoka. "So, any more information gathered on the Inoshiki family?" Mitsuo decided to ask the girls. The two looked at each other and then back to Mitsuo, shrugging. "We have no idea, but I am sure Haruki and Yudai have answers. They are Sunako's watchmen. They could tell you that," spoke honestly. "Oh, okay then. I thought you would know," Mitsuo said as he heard light footsteps approach him carefully. Mitsuo looked behind him to see a Shiki boy. If Mitsuo could recall, it must have been June. "Mr. Mitsuo, do you think the Inoshiki family have children like me?" Mitsuo looked at June, his black and red eyes gleaming with worry. "I am sure they do," Mitsuo said with a grim tone in his voice. Mitsuo was partially scared of the upcoming war between the humans and the Inoshikis, mainly because he would be killing those who still have human emotions and most of all, children. "What will happen to them?" Mitsuo, "Sir?" June asked with big eyes. "Perhaps they will have a stake impaled through their chests, but I am not one who would wish to do it," Mitsuo said before pausing himself. Images of deceased Shiki children flashed into his mind. Images of Akito and Junko as a Shiki being staked haunted his mind. Mitsuo held his mouth. His stomach was tied in knots and Mitsuo coughed up his bile on the sleek wooden floor. "Mitsuo, are you okay?" yelled Masa. The older Shiki man walked towards Mitsuo while June patted his back, softly. "Sorry," Mitsuo muttered before coughing another load onto the floor. Cho stared at Mitsuo with concern in her eyes. "I just can't do it," Mitsuo muttered loud enough for them to hear. "Do what? What do you mean?" Mitsuo Ai asked with concern in her red and black eyes. "Kill. I am bringing a war against the Inoshiki family, yet I will be killing children and adults. I know they are evil unlike you guys, but they are still people." Mitsuo stopped his puking and looked up at the Shiki. Seeing their concerned eyes made Mitsuo feel scared for the upcoming fight. "We are all scared too, Mitsuo. We are fighting our own species, adults, teenagers, children." Ai's voice wandered off as her eyes darted around the room, looking for something to say. Mitsuo looked around to see everyone else was nervous as well. Mitsuo felt a whack hit his head gently, his light brown eyes flashed open to see Mr. Aimu looking down on him. "Mitsuo Nataga, you need to stay up. Remember, you were chosen to do the preparations for the Halloween party. Your group is waiting." Mitsuo looked to his right to see his group, which consisted of teens in the class next door, which was taught by Ms. Renako Sakamoto. They were mostly boys and 2 girls who were chosen to do the party in Mitsuo's group. They teens were Takuji Kinizo, Sira Azuma, Shigeo Makino, Masaru Kagorazaka, Shiro Sakamoto, Mitsuharu Sakakabara, and Tsurumi Bana. Mitsuo got lazily up, still tired from last night. "Mitsuo, how late did you stay up?" Tsuru asked, tapping her foot against the hard wooden floor. "I couldn't sleep. The family is still in mourning after Ryota's passing," Mitsuo said. Although true, Mitsuo was more than happy that Ryota was gone, but an icy cold sensation crawled down his spine. What if Ryota rose as a Shiki? Mitsuo, earth to Mitsuo. "Come on." Shigeo waved his arm around Mitsuo's face, trying to get Mitsuo's attention. "Yeah, what is wrong, Shigeo?" Mitsuo looked drearily up at the black-haired teenager. "Man, you are just tired, are you?" Sira said, scratching the back of his head. Sighing, Mitsuo gave a glare to the grayish-blue-haired teenager who simply shrugged it off. "Guys, don't fight, okay? Everyone lost at least someone at this point," Shiro muttered. Her voice was barely audible, but everyone still caught what she said. "True," Shiro. That is true. I lost mom last weekend, Mitsuharu said, leaning against the smooth wall. His pale blonde hair hung over his face. Tsuru lost both parents and has to live with my family, Takuji muttered sternly until Tsuru struck the back of his head. Hey, it's not like I decided that my parents should die, Tsuru said with anger fuming in her gaze. Shigeo lost his older brother and I lost my younger sister, Sira said, wiping tears from his yellow eyes. I lost my daddy. Shiro started to sniff a bit. Shiro played with a long bit of her white hair. Her nervousness showed itself in her dark violet eyes. Let's get to work. It's no use talking about depressing matters, Tsuru said as she pulled out a box of decorations for the Halloween party and tossed some streamers at Mitsuo. Everyone stood and smiled at Mitsuo. He smiled back happily. The decor was set up perfectly and Mitsuo could see everything was lined up perfectly. Shiro came by dressed as a little witch and smiled happily at Mitsuo as she handed him a spare costume from the back of the school's closet. It was a werewolf costume which was mainly grey with white parts on it, which Mitsuo found interesting, mainly because it reminded him of Kurayami. Are you guys ready? Tsuru shouted with happiness. She was dressed as a spider sorceress. Mitsuharu looked around the room. He was dressed as Wolverine from Marvel, but Mitsuo really wanted to know what he was looking for. Mitsuharu, what are you looking for? Mitsuo asked while Mitsuharu scratched the back of his head. I am wondering where Takuji and Shigeo went, Mitsuharu said until Masaru walked towards him dressed like Lelouch from Koji's. The two ditched us. I seen them running out the door. Masaru laughed while Sira appeared by the door, wearing a custom costume he made of Foxy from the horror game Five Nights at Freddy's. Ah, they are a bunch of crazies, Sira said while fixing the eye patch. Shiro was setting up the last of the decor, happily humming a tune. I think I will go home guys, I need to see if my parents are alright with everything, Mitsuo said. He knew his parents and especially his older sister, Eika, were still trying to cope with the death of Ryota. Bye guys, I'll see you at the party. Mitsuo raced home while peeking behind him to see everyone waving at him. Mitsuo ran and ran, passing by house until he saw an odd thing going on. Ambulance parked in front of the inn. Mitsuo paused silently. Mariko, what happened? Mitsuo ran up to the 21-year-old who shook her head. It's that Rimatsumi. She caught the sickness that is spreading around and now her father is blaming it on my inn. Mariko's blonde hair swung as she shook her head. The longer pink streak played loose. Mitsuo saw the ambulance owners were people from the Tamabiki Hospital, the largest hospital out of the 4 cities. A blonde-haired older man ran towards Mariko and looked at her in the eyes. I should have known you lowlifes were dangerous. You weirdos are killing my daughter. Mr. Matsumi screamed. Mariko looked at him with an unfazed expression, but deep down inside, Mitsuo knew Mariko's pride was hurt. As Mr. Matsumi stepped into his car, Mariko's dark blue eyes were wet with tears. Mariko, it's alright, Mitsuo said, patting the steampunk-loving woman's back. Mitsuo knew how sensitive Mariko was with her inn. The inn was 5-star in Sotoba and everyone loved her services she gives everyone, and having someone get ill and perhaps die in her inn harmed her pride and perhaps give her in a bad reputation. What happened, Mariko? Mitsuo looked at the inn's doors to see Tori Nagata and Koido Akarusa, the girls from Lower Sotoba High School. The girls were from the lower part of Sotoba and almost no one from Lower Sotoba went up here to Central unless they needed errands done or are sick and need to go to the clinic. Tori and Koito still wore their uniforms, white shirt with blue sailor tie, a grey mini skirt with white and blue, and giantly grey socks and white shoes. A visitor gotten sick again girls. I don't know how many deaths we got in total, Mariko said with a hung head. Mitsuo looked to his right to see Kotaro Sakurai, also from Lower Sotoba, and the student was walking with a pail of goat blood. Kotaro, where in the name of all that's holy, got that? Mariko suddenly snapped at the red-haired teenager who quickly was running off, unable to hear her. Mitsuo, can you go check what Kotaro is doing? Mariko said, her hands on her hips. He has been taking blood in his house lately. Last week, he took chicken blood to his house. Koito muttered, feeling rather worried for Kotaro. Sure. Mitsuo looked at the parking area to see Tori's light blue bike. He looked at Tori with big eyes. Can I borrow it, Tori? It would get me to Lower Sotoba quicker, Mitsuo asked the red-haired teenager who smiled. Sure, why not, if that's what you need. Go ahead. Therese smiled as Mitsuo climbed on the bike, taking off. Mitsuo knew Kotaro since the two were friends at a daycare until first grade, where the two were separated thanks to Kotaro moving to Lower Sotoba and changing schools. Writing, Mitsuo knew bits and pieces of where Kotaro may live, but droplets of blood from Kotaro's pail showed where he went. What in the world is Kotaro doing? Mitsuo asked himself, unsure of why he needed goat blood. Mitsuo then hit a rock in the dirt, tipping the bike over and throwing Mitsuo on the ground, getting up with a bruised and cut left arm. Where did he go? Mitsuo looked to see the blood led to a house. Mitsuo was certain this had to be Kotaro's home, as it said the Sakurai household on it. Mitsuo knocked on the door only for it to swing open by itself. It wasn't locked. Kotaro, Mitsuo said with concern as he made his way through the dark home. Some of the windows had curtains or blankets over to keep out the sunlight. This seems like a household for a Shiki. Mitsuo grabbed a flashlight from his bag and slowly turned it on, hearing odd voices underneath the floorboards. Kotaro, Mitsuo said again before finding a stairway to the basement by the kitchen. He gulped, knowing something odd is going on. Kotaro, Mitsuo said as he walked down and slowly opened the door. Pitch blackness flooded his vision. Mitsuo, Kotaro's voice yelled with alarm as he covered a shape with blankets. Kotaro, can you turn the light on, please? Mitsuo asked the red-haired teenager who sighed, walking to a light switch, brightening up the area around them. Kotaro, what was it with the goat blood? Kotaro gulped and looked at the shape underneath the blankets, scared to say something. Mitsuo, I cannot tell you, Kotaro said. Mitsuo stared at him with surprised eyes. Why? What's wrong? Kotaro, Mitsuo asked his friend, who stared at him with defiant brown eyes. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Kotaro said while Mitsuo stared at him with a stern gaze. Kotaro, the shape muttered and moved out of the blankets, revealing a face Mitsuo never seen in such a long time. It was his old friend and cousin, Hidetora Karub. Hidetora, Mitsuo said as he stared at his cousin, blue hair long and messy, a blood-stained white t-shirt, and black and red eyes, symbolizing he was Shiki. But there was something off about Hidetora. He had grayish-colored skin underneath his eyes and he looked incredibly tired. It was the Inoshiki family, Hidetora said, staring at Mitsuo carefully. I was from Lower Sotoba and they called me a worthless half-blood. They ditched me to fend for myself. I am tired, hungry, I need blood, says my stomach, but nothing is working. Hidetora muttered silently. Mitsuo gasped. Hidetora, do you know what you are? Mitsuo asked his cousin, who stared at him with confusion. You are known as a Shiki, a corpse demon, a vampire, Mitsuo explained. Hidetora's eyes flung open. Then that means I need human blood. But I don't want to kill anyone, Hidetora said with nervousness. Mitsuo put his hand on his shoulder. Hidetora, there is a sanctuary for Shiki like you in the forest, led by a girl named Sunako. I need you to go to them. They will look after you and feed you blood from blood transfusion packets, Mitsuo said to Hidetora, who sniffed with delight. Thank you, Mitsuo, Hidetora says with a lively smile, one that Mitsuo was surprised to see on a Shiki's face. But for now, you need to wait until night. You will burn in the sunlight if you venture out, Mitsuo said, and Hidetora nodded. I already had experiences with the sunlight, hence why Kotaro covered the windows, Hidetora said. Kotaro, does anyone know that Hidetora is dead? Mitsuo asked the red-haired teenager, who shook his head. No. I kept him here ever since he gotten sick with that anemia stuff. I thought he was gone for good until he one day was awake, standing and alive, Kotaro said. Then tonight, we will take him there. I know where it is and people would suspect he is in a costume because of his odd-colored eyes. Mitsuo smiled. Tonight, Hidetora will find peace in his lifetime as a Shiki. Chapter 18, Sunako's Memories and Grief. Mitsuo grabbed his trick-or-treat bag, wearing his grey wolf costume. He smiled and happily walked out the door. He pretended to trick-or-treat when in reality, he was to help move Hidetora to Sunako's cabin. Mitsuo jumped, hearing the feminine voice of the Jinru women, Raiko and Gina, outside, both dressed like wolves except Raiko's was brown and Gina's was red. You know, there is a lot of irony when a werewolf is dressing up as a wolf, Mitsuo said as they giggled. Raiko? Gina, I have something important to ask you, Mitsuo said, and they looked at him with curious eyes. What is that, Mitsuo? Raiko asked while Gina began to talk. Whatever it is, we would be happy to help you with it. Gina smiled as she spoke. It's my cousin, Hidetora. He died and rose as a Shiki. My friend, Kotaro tried keeping him safe and alive, but he is getting weak, Mitsuo said, while Gina and Raiko gasped. Do the Inoshikas know he rose? Gina said with concern, only for Mitsuo to shake his head sadly. They casted him out, telling him he was a half-blood and made sure he was going to die. Mitsuo explained further. Raiko's eyes were fuming with hatred. Those cowards, how can they do that to him? Raiko said with anger. What foe you think they mean by half-blood? Gina asked with wonder. I am guessing they don't like any Shiki who are from Lower Sotoba. It is a possibility, Mitsuo said, remembering they took in many from Central or Higher Sotoba as it was called by the ones who lived in Lower Sotoba. That's terrible. Who knows how many others like him are left to starve, and without any training as a Shiki, they are sure to die off, Gina said, her eyes wide with worry and concern for the poor Shiki that are suffering. I need your guys' help if I am to get Hidatara to Sunako's cabin. Kotaro will help us out. I told him everything, Mitsuo explained. Gina and Raiko nodded. Mitsuo ran with Gina and Raiko behind him. Mitsuo knew where Kotaro's house was now, and knew if he didn't hurry, Hidatara could be dying. I hope we are not too late, Gina said, puffing. Who knows how many days he didn't have blood, Raiko said to Mitsuo. Kotaro tried feeding him animal blood. This morning, he tried feeding him goat blood, Mitsuo told them while they looked at each other. Blood from other animals don't quench our thirst. Sadly, a Shiki will vomit it up like regular food, Raiko said. She knew a lot about Shiki thanks to her companions, and when she is taking care of young Sunako, being a Jinru, she can eat regular food without problem and can walk around in sunlight anytime she wishes. I feel selfish, Raiko said as she turned to Gina. Why is that, Raiko? Gina asked her orchid-haired friend. I was so lucky to become Jinru, yet I do not appreciate it. Look at the risks our Shiki have to take. I should respect their lives, Raiko said. Her brown eyes were saddened. Gina looked at her friend. Her eyes were sorrowful for her feelings. I am sure all of us were like that too, Raiko, Gina said with sadness. We are here, Mitsuo said to his friends. They looked at the house. The curtains were down, keeping sunlight out. This has got to be the place if curtains are down to keep sunlight out, Gina muttered. Mitsuo knocked on the door only for a hand to grab him and pull him inside. Mitsuo, they shouted as the door closed. The door opened up again for the two to come in, and they saw Mitsuo and the red-haired boy that had to be Kotaro Sakurai. Sorry about that, Mitsuo. Kotaro smiled and scratched the back of his head. It's fine. Can you get Hidatara? I got Raiko and Gina here who will take him to his new home, Mitsuo told Kotaro as he pointed to the waving young women. Okay, let me get him. Kotaro dashed to the basement to fetch his friend. You would like Hidatara, Mitsuo said as he smiled at Gina and Raiko. Kotaro, what's wrong? Hidatara said as Kotaro grabbed him by his hand, leading him outside. Thank goodness it was night. Gina looked at Hidatara, examining the dark gray circles around his eyes which formed from not drinking suitable blood. Exactly like I thought. Hidatara needs blood quickly, Gina said as all five of them went to the cabin. It's a good thing you brought him just in time to us, Sunako said as she sipped her tea. All Shiki can drink normal drinks, but only if necessary. Here you are, Hidatara. Seishin handed the young man a blood transfusion packet which he hungrily sipped down without a problem or a second thought. Long, past shoulder-length blue hair, white shirt, is a Shiki. You remind me of a young woman I once knew, Hidatara, Sunako said, smiling rather painfully at her dark memories. Who was that, Sunako? Mitsuo asked while the purple-haired Shiki girl sighed. Nao Yasamari. She was a good but sad Shiki. She hated the fact she rose. She killed her family trying to bring them back, but they all ended up dead for good, Sunako said, remembering the time Nao screamed at her for her rising. Nao Yasamori. I saw that name on the files in the clinic. It said she died from the same symptoms the Shiki are passing around, Mitsuo said, recalling her name among others, like Ritsuko Kunihiro, Megumi Shimizu, Toru Musu, Natsuno Yukikoide, and many more. What were the others like? You know, Megumi, Ritsuko, Toru. Did you know them? Mitsuo asked, curious to know about them. Megumi was the city girl stuck in a village type. She wore fancy clothes and everyone made fun of her. Toru was kind-hearted but soon became paranoid and guilty for his actions as a Shiki, something I tried comforting him about. Ritsuko refused to drink blood and stayed by Toru's side until they died, Sunako said as she smiled, remembering how kind they were to her, mainly Megumi, who was grateful to Sunako for turning her Shiki along with Chizuru and Tatsumi. Wow, they seemed like good Shiki, Mitsuo Mitsuo said as he saw a tear escape Sunako's dark eyes. You may not find it, but there was one named Chizuru. She was one of the best friends I have ever had. Sunako smiled and Mitsuo looked curious. Who was she? Mitsuo asked her with a soft voice. My adopted mother, Chizuru Garashiki. Sunako smiled, thinking of those great times she and Chizuru had together. I am so sorry to hear that, Sunako. Mitsuo's head hung low, feeling as if a stake of guilt struck his chest. Follow me, Mitsuo. Sunako calmly beckoned Mitsuo to a big room. In the room was a massive stone. Carved in it were all the names of past Shiki who were killed off. The name that stood out the most was the one that had a special memory text. In memory of Chizuru Garashiki, a kind mother and wife who lived twice, gone but never forgotten. The text said. Mitsuo felt like tearing up. Sunako grabbed a picture of Chizuru from the tombstone and showed it to Mitsuo. Mitsuo was so surprised. Chizuru was such a gorgeous Shiki woman, long and wavy pale blonde hair, dark eyes with blue highlights, and wearing a beautiful blue summer dress. I am fighting the Inoshikas because I feel like Chizuru Wild have wanted me to save the town. Despite her getting killed, she loved Sotoba more than any place we seen, Sunako explained as she brushed the tombstone gently with her icy cold hand. You are fighting because you believe their deaths were in vain, right? Mitsuo asked Sunako, who nodded sadly. I feel like it was all my fault that I killed them, and to make them happy and rest peacefully, I will fight to make sure they can be happy. Sunako smiled. I don't want any more deaths to be in vain. Sunako smiled to Mitsuo, who nodded to the purple-haired Shiki girl. I will make sure of that too, Sunako Garashiki, Mitsuo said as he hugged the young Shiki girl. Chapter 19, Halloween Horror. Mitsuo trekked around the village for Halloween candy. He knew his parents and sister would be a little worried if they saw he ran off without anything. Here you are, Mitsuo, enjoy. Mitsuo smiled as Hanaoi Amada, Kyo's mother, threw 3 pieces of chocolate in the bag, while Kyo stood and watched happily. Kyo was dressed as a pirate, with the eye patch he has to wear as an interesting accessory, while his mother was a dog. Mitsuo. Hey. Mitsuo looked down to see Yutaka with Akihiro, Hiroko, and Mikio. Also holding Hiroko's hand was little Junko, Masayoshi's little sister. Yutaka was, strangely enough, dressed like a vampire. Mikio was dressed as a fireman, Hiroko was an angel, and Akihiro was the Grim Reaper. Junko was Alice from Alice in Wonderland. Junko's stuffed bunny, Mr. Fluffles, was wearing a ribbon that had a heart on it, to resemble he was part of the kingdom under the rule of the Queen of Hearts. Mitsuo, we are going to Cane Masa to get candy, wanna come? Akihiro said, and Mitsuo's body instantly froze. He saw Yutaka's did too. Mitsuo said, looking around for an answer in his head. You know what, I don't feel comfortable with visiting them yet. You know, Yutaka said as he went to Mitsuo's side. The red and white-haired boy smiled kindly to Mitsuo, his lavender eyes shining. Alright, it's your choice I guess, Akihiro said with a smile as he was walking with the others. Junko stopped moving and went towards Yutaka. Junko? Hiroko looked behind her to see Junko ran behind Mitsuo and Yutaka. I am staying with Yutaka. I hate those people, Junko muttered, and Hiroko was surprised. Why do you hate them, Junko? Hiroko said to the pink-haired girl. They killed my big brother Masayoshi, Junko said, clenching on Mr. Fluffles tightly. How can you say that, Junko? Hiroko said. Mitsuo and Yutaka stared wide-eyed at little Junko. Masayoshi was all sweet and lovey with that Yuki girl before he died. I swear she killed him somehow because he got sick after he met and went out on dates with her, Junko explained, her dark green eyes fuming with anger as she glared at Cane Masa, standing proudly above the village. Hiroko looks at Junko, holding onto Mitsuo's wolf tail on his costume tightly. Alright, Mitsuo. Yutaka, take Junko home to her father after everything is done, Hiroko told them as she ran to catch up to Mikio and Akihiro. She also killed mommy, I just know it, Junko said, tears forming in her eyes as Mitsuo grabbed the girl and held her. Don't worry, Junko, I will make sure they don't get you, ever, Mitsuo said as Junko wiped her tears with Mr. Fluffles' white tears. They began to walk again, and after that scene, Mitsuo knew Junko would never step a foot in front of Cane Masa. Mitsuo will never forgive those evil people, killing Masayoshi, taking away Hotaro's sisters and mother, and trying to kill Hidetaro for being a half-blooded Shiki. There is a difference between evil and misunderstood, but that woman, Ko, is a monster, Mitsuo said to himself. Mitsuo said as he accidentally ran into a girl around his height. She said in a small voice. Mitsuo opened one eye to see she was in a professor lab coat. Yukimura, Mitsuo said as he saw the black-haired girl, getting up and looking at him with light blue eyes. I am so sorry, Yukimura says as she bows several times to Mitsuo, Yutaka, and Junko apologetically. She fixed her glasses after the bowing and looks down at her feet in shame. That felt like that wasn't enough, Yukimura says, feeling bad until Yutaka smiled at her. It's fine, Yukimura, but why are you acting so formal towards us? Yutaka asked the black-haired girl quietly. Well, Yutaka-chan, Mitsuo-san, and Junko-kun, Miss Inoshiki-chan wanted me to. She says I need to be formal or else. Yukimura says. Mitsuo, Junko, and Yutaka had confused looks on their faces as she used Japanese honorifics. Or else what? Mitsuo said, nervous as to what Ko wanted Yukimura to do. Or else she will call me undeserving of life. She says she will take my family hostage if such happens. I can't let them do that. Everyone's eyes were wide. I knew they were pure evil, Junko said as she squeezed Mr. Fluffles' ears tightly. Yukimura, come with us. We need to discuss something important to you, Mitsuo said with fear in his eyes as he grabbed Yukimura's wrist. The three led Yukimura through the crowd, only for Mitsuo to accidentally run into a figure. Why, hello child. Yutaka and Junko's eyes were wide. It was Ko. I see you are doing what I told you. Yukimura, keep it up, sweetie. Ko complimented Yukimura, who bowed 7 times. Sister, should we get going? A mysterious, dark aquamarine-haired Shiki Mitsuo never seen before, said with worried eyes. This is my older sister Ruko. Remember her well? Mitsuo hissed at the brown-haired teen, who saw something terrible. Ruko held a picture of Ri from the page and did the finger motion across her neck. You did it? Mitsuo said to Ruko, who cracked a smile. It was done by me and a few of my subordinates. Ruko giggled as she stared at him. I don't understand what is going on, Yukimura said with nervousness in her voice. Well, you will think this is silly, but remember those stories of Count Dracula told by children who misbehave? Yutaka asked Yukimura, who tilted her head to the left in confusion. What if we said that Tokigari are around and they are standing in front of you? Mitsuo said as he pointed at Ko and Ruko. Yukimura's eyes went wide. That explains why your skin is cold and why your mansion reeked like rotting corpse, Yukimura said with defiance. Correct. When they say you are the brightest in Sotoba, they are not lying, are they? Yukimura, Ko laughed like a madwoman as she and Ruko started walking. Believe it, children, the war is starting, Ko said as she made her way to Kingmasa. I don't believe it. They are real, and not your Twilight kind either, Yukimura said as Yutaka held in a bar from the mention of that horrible American film. The war is already beginning. What does she mean from that? Mitsuo said, his mind whirring with questions and very few answers. Chapter 20, Tsuneko and Chinatsu's Pain. Chinatsu stood atop Kingmasa's roof. She could see her house, Hikaru working on his song for his band. Chinatsu had a hard night. The flashback terrified her. Ko roughly grabbed Chinatsu's wrist violently, leading her down to the basement of Kingmasa. Ko, what are you doing? Why are you taking me here? Chinatsu's red and black eyes were frantic. The face Ko gave her was sending chills down her spine. You haven't drank any blood for 2 days, worthless girl. Tonight, I shall force it down your throat. Ko's eyes flashed wildly. Chinatsu was instantly frightened. Please, don't let me. Chinatsu wanted to fight, but Ko grabbed her head with her free arm. Don't make this any more difficult than it already is, Ko hissed. Her face was very close. It was almost claustrophobic. Ko led Chinatsu to a dark room. It was very bright to a Shiki who had flawless night vision. The room was filled with the stench of decomposing corpses, and the room was splashed and painted with dried blood from the previous victims. In the middle was an older man, and Chinatsu knew who it was. It was Mr. Akaikazuchu, who was in charge of the temple. How did you get him when you can't take a single step close to the temple or shrines? Chinatsu asked Ko, who giggled like a child who opened a Christmas present. We found him all alone, late one night, and nabbed him. Quite a catch if I do say so myself. Chinatsu saw the middle-aged man on the floor. He was the one who was so nice to everyone and anyone who was from Sotoba or tourists. He was well respected by all who knew him. Question was, how can Ko ask her to kill such an innocent man? Feast Chinatsu, for this is a nice Halloween dinner. Ko smiled. Chinatsu saw Ko was blocking the door. The only way out was to kill, and Chinatsu knew that. I refuse. I may be a monster, but I will still be myself, Chinatsu said with a weakened smile. You're more of an idiot than I thought. Ko dashed at Chinatsu, held her by her dirty blonde hair. You will bite him and suck him dry of his blood. I shall force it on you." Ko kicked Chinatsu's legs, trying to get her to scream in pain, but Chinatsu kept her mouth shut, icy cold tears falling down her face, painfully. Chinatsu remembered Sakura. This is what Ko did to her for the rest of her life. How much pain she must have endured. Ko punched her back with her free arm, beating at her back. Chinatsu coughed some of her dying blood as Ko slammed her face on Akaikazu's arm. Her fangs penetrated his flesh. "Drink, you pile of filth. You need it." Ko smirked as Chinatsu felt his blood drain from his body into hers. Chinatsu felt like filth, worse than it. She was killing the man she knew since birth, and there may be no way of bringing him back unless he rises. Chinatsu had to admit the blood was good, sweet even, but the pain in her dead heart ignored her lust for the taste. Chinatsu felt the last droplets of blood slither through her fangs, and Ko pulled her off and stared at her. "How did that feel?" Ko said as she violently threw Chinatsu against the stone wall, her white summer dress ruined with dirt, blood, and tears. "Get yourself cleaned up. You are despicable," Ko said as Chinatsu gathered herself up and ran up the stairs. Tears flew from her red and black eyes as she ran up. Chinatsu was wearing more of a punk-styled outfit, something she knew Hikaru and Michio would he died to see, but Chinatsu was kinda forced to wear it. All the other outfits they had were either too big on her or too revealing. Sakura actually took her summer dress to get it cleaned. Chinatsu loved Sakura. She was kind, sweet, but incredibly timid, but Chinatsu can't blame her. Ko was a demon and she wondered what the girls, Chi and Mitsuru, were like, because everyone can see Ko acts like a servant in front of the girls. They got to be the prime example of pure evil. Chinatsu shuddered. Chinatsu stood and went back inside the castle. Shiki and Arata were to come out tomorrow night from their cell, and Chinatsu knew those two will do anything to blame it on the others but themselves. Sunako was drinking a special tea that Tri made for her. Sunako nodded to him as a sign of her gratitude toward the Jinru. The door slowly opened and Sunako saw it was the new Jinru, Kurayami. "Sunako, I have a question to ask you," the Lolita-dressed Jinru girl asked Sunako. The Shiki smiled. "Have a seat, Kurayami." Kurayami saw a mat where she settled down on, looking at Sunako with a question-hungry gaze. "Ask away, please." Sunako says, she really wanted to gain the trust and companionship of Kurayami, so this may be one way she can do that. "How do you know the Inoshikas? You seem to think of them as terrible people," Kurayami asked, and Sunako stood up. Sunako's black eyes were staring at her feet with sorrow. "Let me show you something, Kurayami," Sunako said to the Jinru, taking her to the room where the tombstone of all her Shiki was present. Kurayami stared in awe as she looked at it with amazement. "This is why," Sunako said, and Kurayami was confused. "Why is this tombstone the reason for the Inoshiki?" Kurayami asked with sudden eyes. "Let me tell you then. It all started around 50 years ago in spring," Sunako said as she began to tell her tale of the Inoshikas. "Man, I am bored, Sunako. When are we gonna meet these guys?" Tatsumi said, his eyes staring at Sunako, who flashed a smile. "Soon, Tatsumi, soon," Sunako said as the doors opened. A single Jinru lady opened it. Tatsumi and Sunako looked at her with surprise. "Welcome to the household of the Inoshikas." The woman fell over, blood poured from her head and Tatsumi caught her. "Hey, you okay?" Tatsumi caught the Jinru woman while a graceful Shiki woman walked in front of them. "Forgive me for my Jinru's stupidity. She cannot do anything right, so I punished her." Tatsumi and Sunako glared at the Shiki. "Get back to work, now." Ko grabbed the young Jinru by her hair as Sunako ran in front of her. "This is uncalled for." Sunako rose her voice at the older woman, who laughed. "And what do you want me to do?" "I shall do whatever I want with this worthless witch." Ko dragged her as Chi and Mitsuru laughed from on top of the balcony. "Serves her right for not playing with us," she said with a giggle. "Yeah, she is so pathetic," Mitsuru said with a wicked cackle. "What kind of display is this?" Tatsumi said as he watched the girl fall over again. "You better keep your Okigari better care," Sunako said as Mitsuru laughed again. "Well, you see that village down there? Well, we are going to take it and the vampires who live there under our command." Mitsuru giggled and Sunako came up with something. "I will go down there and turn it before you, and I will show you peace," Sunako says as she smiles. "Well, why don't you show us? And you can take that worthless trash with you," she said with a smile that was full of anything but kindness. "Fine, but I will show you that they will be more happier under my lead than you." Sunako and Tatsumi helped the Jinru woman out of their home. Laughter erupted from the house. Tatsumi patched the woman up. Despite her being a Jinru, capable of fast healing, She was hurt badly. You alright? Sunako asked her, who nodded as she looked at her. I am Sunako Garashiki. That is Tatsumi. What is your name? Sunako asked the woman, who smiled, despite her injured face. Yashi Korashi. At your service. Yashi smiled and Sunako looked down at Sotoba, remembering the girls' bet. I will make sure the vampires will be happy, Sunako says as Yashi stared at Sunako with confusion. Are you seriously taking their bet? Yashi said as she cried. Not only that, but I want a place where we can live happily and be accepted for who we are, Sunako says with a smile. I promise you all, Sunako says. Sadly, all the others were killed, and they died in vain because I took a stupid bet. Even Yashi and Tatsumi are gone, Sunako said, looking at the names engraved, Tatsumi and Yashi's names beside Chizuru's. I am sorry to hear that, Sunako. I really am, Kurayami says, and suddenly decided to spill the beans about her name. In fact, I will tell you my name, Sunako, Kurayami said, and Sunako's eyes were wide. My name is... Chapter 21, Seishin and Mitsuo. I get it now. The neighbors from Kanemasa and all they claim to be cousins are actually vampires, or Shiki as what you guys like to call them, and they are the ones in charge of the deaths in Sotoba. Yukimura recaps what Mitsuo and Yutaka told her. Junko stood with amazement. Well, it's not the craziest thing I have heard, and it's actually believable considering what I just seen. Yukimura fixed her glasses and smiles. I will help you guys gather information though, and I promise I won't tell anyone else about this, Yukimura said with a smile. Yutaka and Mitsuo sighed with relief and Junko giggled. It would probably make you guys look crazy, Junko said with a big smile on her face. I would tell your friends if I were you. Michio, Mikio, Akihiro, and Koton. You should tell them, Mitsuo, Yukimura said as she picked up little Junko. I am taking her home. I also need to do tutoring with Chiharu, Yukimura said, and Mitsuo smiled. Chiharu Kate was a woman who is a former student at a university, student who, when graduated, decided to help students. Yukimura always helps her out on a daily basis after school, but I promise that this discussion will be kept secret until we can prove they exist, Yukimura said as she and Junko darted out the door. Things are getting more and more dangerous as we continue. I think we need to approach more carefully next time, Yutaka said, the lavender-eyed teenager said with a nervous tone to his voice. Yeah, I will come up with one soon, Yutaka. Let's get some rest tonight, Mitsuo said. Yutaka plopped down on Mitsuo's couch and looked at him. Can I sleep over here? I don't want the Shiki to get me while I am walking home. Mitsuo sighed but smiled and agreed through a nod. Great, Yutaka smiled as he rested on the couch. Mitsuo ruffled his white and red hair. Good night, partner, he said with a smile. Mitsuo woke early with his older sister, Eika, to help with the dishes. You should be aware that I am gonna leave for home in a month, Mitsuo, Eika said, still slightly torn by Ryota's death but gotten over most of it by now. I know, sis, you tell me every day and it's getting a little annoying, Mitsuo said as he walked to his room to put his uniform on. Plus, I done all the work when you were gone, so don't even be like that to me, Mitsuo said as he fixed the tie on his uniform, while he could see Eika in the kitchen. Well, I had no idea my little brother can act that way towards a grieving older sister, Eika said, with green eyes full of false sorrow. Plus, it seems you gotten over it long ago, sis, Mitsuo said as he began to walk out of the house. Eika just huffed as she returned to her work. Mitsuo opened the door to see Koton. Her bright face lit up with joy. Mitsuo, I brought you someone who wished to see you. Mitsuo looked over Koton's shoulder to see Seishin Muro. Seishin was the Jinru under Sunako's leadership who supported her and cared so much about her. Despite not talking too much to each other, Mitsuo believes that Seishin is a very reliable man. Hello, Mitsuo, I heard Ko gave you some trouble, Seishin said, and Mitsuo's eyes went a bit wide. How did you know that? Mitsuo asked Seishin, wondering if someone told him or if he's seen the whole thing himself. Yukimura told me. I told her I was a friend to you and she knew right away what and who I was. Mitsuo smiled. It was a good thing Yukimura didn't blurt out everything to everyone. Yeah. She was with me along with little Junko Masuda. You should know her as Masayoshi's little sister, Mitsuo said as Eika walked towards them. Mitsuo, I don't care how many people you invite, but talk somewhere else other than the front door, Eika said as she walked to her room. Mitsuo felt the prickle of annoyance as Eika said that. My sister, Mitsuo told Seishin as he points at her. She lost her husband and my beloved brother-in-law to the Inoshikas, and she blames it all on me, acting as if I need to rely on her 24/7. I hope he doesn't rise, Mitsuo said as he looked at his feet, thinking about what he should say. I heard that Rimatsumi girl just died last night, Seishin said, and Mitsuo had a surprised expression. She is already dead? But how can she die that fast? Mitsuo said with utter confusion, and Seishin decided to tell him what he thought killed her. I am certain that two Shiki were in charge of her death. Which Shiki held a grudge or anything against her? Seishin asked Mitsuo, who thought the only one who had a reason to kill her was Chio. She attended that pageant and lost to her, so I would imagine Chio killing her. But who else? Mitsuo thought carefully. Seishin smiled. If you don't know, it's fine, he said with such amazing calmness. Chio made a treaty with me when she was dying as a human, but now she forgot about it and is off to bite my neck. Why is that? Mitsuo aide to Seishin, who shook his head sadly. I am guessing since she rose, she feels like she can do whatever she likes and the treaty was to expose her weak point or something like that, Seishin said with a look to his face. Well, whatever she was doing, it doesn't change the fact she killed, Mitsuo said. He gave a small laugh. It's funny. She is just as cruel as a human as she is a Shiki, Mitsuo said and smiled at Seishin. I shall come back tomorrow and maybe we can discuss more soon, Seishin said as he bidded a farewell, and Mitsuo bowed too. I may see you when I go down to see Suniko, right? Mitsuo asked the silver-haired man, who smiled. Perhaps. Remember, I am always close to Suniko and I will do whatever it takes to keep her safe, Seishin said and began to leave. Mitsuo watched as Seishin left. He smiled knowing Seishin was on his side. I wonder if Kurayami is the same way, Mitsuo silently muttered. Chapter 22, The Truth About Ran. Ran Likada, Jinru of the Inoshiki family, was playing a game with Mitsuru and Chi Inoshiki. Ran nervously moved her character in the game forward, gulping nervously as Mitsuru, the eldest daughter, took her move. She held a serrated knife in her hand as she watched Mitsuru move. Mitsuru took out Ran's character and smirked. You know what is next, right Ran? She said as Mitsuru pinned Ran's left arm down on the board. No, please. I will get it right. I swear. Ran screamed as she slid her knife on Ran's ring finger, and lopped it off. Ran screamed in pain. Blood poured down her arm, staining the sleeve of her school uniform with blood. Oh, it's not that bad, Ran. You deal with it all the time. I thought to have gotten used to it by now. Guess not, Mitsuru said with a sneer. Ran looked to see her finger slowly regenerating like all Shiki and Jinru wounds, but it still hurts her. I guess we will throw this in the garbage, Mitsuru said as she grabbed her severed finger, and she laughed. Why do you two do this to me? Ran says, holding her hand in pain. The black eyes of the girls glared at them. It's your turn, Ran, Mitsuru said with a sneer. Ran picked up another figure with her unharmed hand and took down the character that attacked hers and claimed her finger. Oh, well Mitsuru, you know the rules, she said as she grabbed Mitsuru's hand and chopped it clean off. Laughter erupted from the mansion as the girls viewed the blood with glimmering eyes as if it were a show. Ran cried that night, wondering what she did to deserve such a fate. Mitsuo walked to school. He always wondered what was in Ran's head. She appeared nice until she bit and killed Yukiko. Mitsuo wondered which Ran was the real one. Mitsuo bumped into someone. His thoughts have caused him to become blind towards his surroundings. OF, Mitsuo said as he opened his eyes to see who he walked into. His kind eyes instantly went wide. It was Ran, but with a reddened face from tears. What the? Mitsuo looked at her, on the floor and in tears. Mitsuo suddenly noticed a stain of blood going down her sleeve. Mitsuo gasped and grabbed her hand to examine what was indeed wrong. In the middle of her ring finger, was a scratch that wrapped around the finger. Mitsuo then realized what must have happened. Who did this to you, Ran? Tell me this and I may spare you despite what you did, Mitsuo said as the blue-gray-haired Jinru sniffed and looked at him, her lavender eyes flashing red and black as she stared at him. Mitsuru and Chi, they wanted me to play their game. Ran looked at him with saddened eyes. They cut off my finger. Last time, they hacked off my leg, my arm, my ear, and one time, Gouged out my eye, Mitsuo gasped, surprised he never realized the torment the Shiki were gaining from the dictatorous girls. They do it to themselves, but the difference they have with me is they enjoy it, madly. It's terrifying, Ran says with a small whimper. Mitsuo kneeled down to the sad girl and hugged her, and soon realized she was the rare, innocent Shiki along with Masayoshi, Yuki, and who knows who else. Mitsuo saw Ran gather her things and wipe the tears from her eyes. Sorry, she said as she dashed down the dirt path towards the school. Mitsuo stared after her. Reiko Saitama. Here. Kinoshita. I am here. Mitsuo Nataga. Right here. Miki Oshiga. Over here. Shingakosha. Physically I am here. Mentally I am not. Of course you are. Yukimura-ki. Here sir. Hiroko Hyogo. I am present. Rin Shunsun. Right here. Akihiro Ida. Here. Over here. Hara Fujiwara. Right here. Mr. Hideyoshi Aimu was finishing the roll call of the students. Mitsuo looked to see Koton talking all friendly with Ran. Mitsuo had to smile until he heard a screech from outside the classroom. What is that running down your arm? Everyone stared at the character and realized it was Aniya Mizushima and Saku Ibaraki from the third classroom. Everyone turned to Ran, who soon had eyes widened with fear. That's blood, screamed Kumeko Akita, pointing at Ran with a finger painted with blood-red nail polish. Hideyoshi walked towards Ran and lifted her arm. The bloodstains were visible. What happened, Ran? Mr. Aimu said with a nervous face. I cut myself and I didn't wash my uniform, Ran said, and everyone stared at her with wide eyes. I need you to go to Nizameko Kingo, our school nurse, to get you cleaned up. Alright Ran, Mr. Aimu said with a nervous smile. Even Akihiro ran to the bathroom to vomit. Fine, I will go, Ran said, taking the slip and started to walk down the halls. Everyone stared after her, everyone even forgot that Siko and Ariya were still there. Mitsuo's thoughts began to whirl. Will the nurse realize something is off about Ran? Mitsuo gulped. The time was almost here. Chapter 23, Past of Yuki. Ko stood with Shig, Arata, and Yuki. Ko had a terrible plan going on in her head, but she was willing to go with it. We will attack Mitsuo and show him what happens when someone sticks their noses where they don't belong. Ko smirked with evil while Arata and Shig laughed. Yuki stood silent. She couldn't kill Mitsuo, no way, right? Her love for Masayoshi turned her into a person who she believed was lost forever. And Yuki closed her eyes and thought, hey, Chikao, stop it. Yuki laughed as he waved a paper in her face, laughing as he did so. What's wrong, Yu? You scared of a flyer of our band? Chikao said with a laugh. Yuki smiled. Her dark violet eyes looked up at the sandy blonde. He smiled. Chikao Obnata, the singer behind the Cutthroats and the boyfriend of sweet, 20-year-old Yuki Hojo. I heard some weird people are coming over to visit. I wonder if they would like a performance, Chikao said as Yuki smiled happily. I have no idea who wouldn't want to have a performance. You guys are the best, Chikao. Yuki clapped happily. Her boyfriend had a loving gaze with his lime green eyes. I hope so. They are called the Inoshikas. Odd name, but I guess the Cutthroats are more odd compared to them. He laughed as Yuki hugged him, feeling the bliss of being around. Kyoko gave her such a boost of energy. Tonight we shall perform, so get those drums of yours ready. Kyoko smiled as he walked home. The sunset complemented on his blonde hair perfectly. Yuki's face gleamed with love. Her long blue hair was blowing gently in the summer breeze. It was perfect, too perfect. Then they did it, Yuki thought, and then the pictures of that faded day erupted in her eyes. Blood dripped everywhere. Yuki stood in the middle of the madness, sobbing uncontrollably as Chi and Mitsuru laughed madly. Foolish girl. You should have seen it. Too bad you were late. Mitsuru laughed with madness surging in her blackened eyes. Let's give her a much painful death, Mitsuru said as she pinned Yuki to the wall and Mitsuru's fangs met her precious skin from her neck. Yuki screamed in agony. Feeling her blood draining from her body was horrific and painful. Yuki's screams were destroyed into a faint whimper. Yuki felt Chi's fangs sink on her arm, blood flowing out of her at a fast rate. The last thing she saw was Kyoko's decapitated head, his lime green eyes, cloudy but still beautiful, staring back at her with a faint smile as the world went black. Ah, you rose? Ko smirked as Yuki woke up. She looked down to see her body was white as ice and felt like it too despite her being well tanned from being out in the sun. "What happened to me?" Yuki said with a weak voice. "You have rose as one of us, congratulations, Yuki." Yuki heard Ko laugh. How much Yuki wanted to escape this nightmare, return to Kyoko, and start the band again with her friends, Kurara Maruyama and Ikmio Nishi. "I wanted so badly to die, to be with my band, to be with Kyoko," Yuki said in her thoughts. How life was cruel to her. Back to the present, Yuki looked at her clenched fists, but they softened when Masayoshi came into her mind. "Masayoshi, he must be the spirit of Kyoko. How much I wish he is," Yuki said as she looked at the moon. Kyoko, smiling at her was what she seen. He must be happy for her that there was someone she needed finally in 60 long and difficult years. Yuki ignored the others in the room, who taught her how to kill, taught her how to be cruel and horrid to others. All those thoughts were washed by Masayoshi. Some vampires believed she seduced him to kill him, but honestly, she truly loved him. "Kyoko, please don't be jealous of Masayoshi, for he has given me the first rays of happiness since you," Yuki said with a smile at the moon. Luckily the other Shiki ignored her. "I hope we can meet again, Kyoko, and I will make sure you meet Masayoshi and become the best of friends." Chapter 24, Attack on the Library. Mitsuo held his chin in thought. He was certain that Hotaka and Emi was busy with victims and he knew the only way to gather more information was to check the Sotoba library. Mitsuo knew where he would find information and knew that the library has a lot of books that may tell him about the Shiki. Opening the doors he saw some people on the computers and a lot venturing the library and reading books in the rest area. "Yeah, take that, woohoo, yeah." Mitsuo looked at his classmate, Haru Fujiwara, playing a video game on the computer only for Yukiko Shizuoka and Rishitakagi, who are the helpers of the library and from Mitsuo's school, to walk over to him. "Haru, this is a place of learning, not video games," Yukiko said, shaking her head. Risa glared after finding out Haru was wearing earphones, shutting away any sounds from outside. Risa shook her head, her bright red hair shaking side to side in the loose ponytail. "I think I can help." Mitsuo turned to see it was Seishin. "Thanks Seishin, he is always doing this and now he brought earphones to block us out." Mitsuo watched as Seishin tapped Haru's shoulder while the brown-haired kid's eyes rolled. "Haru, please listen to me," Seishin said, and Haru continued playing, ignoring the silver-haired man. "Why should I listen to you? We barely even know you," Hera said, light green eyes gleaming at the screen of the computer. Mitsuo saw Seishin took the earphones out of Haru's ears and talked to him. "You will soon, but not right now. Please do work if you are going to come over to the library," Seishin said while Haru puffed out his cheeks, gathering his things and leaving. "Thanks for your help, Seishin." "Haru has been like this for quite some time," Yukiko said, playing with a piece of her pale blue braided hair. "After this I am going to talk to him, then feed my bird, Puffy," Risa said. Blue eyes stared at the ground with worry over her favorite bird. Mitsuo laughed and soon, Yukiko, Risu, and Seishin turned to see him. "Ah, Mitsuo, you came to find books?" Seishin said. Mitsuo smiled. He knew Seishin knew why he really was here, but happily Seishin was keeping him covered. "Yeah, I thought it'd be best to expand my horizons and read a bit more," Mitsuo said as he smiled. "Well, look away, Mitsuo," Yukiko said as she pointed at all the rows of books, and Mitsuo looked at the two. "Risu, do you know where the mythological creature section is? I want to read stories on vampires if that's fine." Risu smiled at Mitsuo's question, and Mitsuo smiled, making sure he didn't seem too suspicious. "Hiya Mitsuo, welcome to the library." Mitsuo turned to see a 26-year-old woman who he knew quite well since he was little. It was Kayase Yamohiro, who was a funny woman who was kind-hearted and a bit klutzy, but loved to help her friends and family. The most notable thing about Kayase is how she dresses her green hair in multiple crazy styles, which always was a treat depending on which day of the week it was. Her light orchid eyes shined as she smiled at Mitsuo, since she was his babysitter ever since she was 14. Of course he grew out of it, but she still comes over to talk to him about important information or help him with schoolwork when he needs it. Kayase normally helped tutor or take care of Tsu when her parents are gone. "What kind of things have you been interested in, Mitsuo?" Kayase said, leaning in to see what Mitsuo was looking at. "Books about vampires and the undead. I want to expand my horizons on my hobbies," he said with a smile at his former babysitter. "You grew up so fast," Kayase said with a smile and looked at Yukiko. "I need to get going. Groceries to run and I need to tutor Tsu at 6 because of a meeting her parents have to attend," Kayase said as she walked out, carrying her bag of library books, all of which were from the study section. Mitsuo saw Seishin leave the library, carrying some book, possibly something to read to Tsuneko. Mitsuo examined the section, and found several books so far called Blood's Curse, Dracula, and Knowledge of a Vampire. Mitsuo could see Knowledge of a Vampire was a non-fiction towards facts on vampires topped through legends and myths. Blood's Curse was a novel, but Mitsuo wanted to read it just in case, same with Dracula. "Well, I think I got what I came here for," Mitsuo said with a smile while he headed to the checkout desk where Yukiko stood behind the desk. "So Mitsuo, found everything?" she said with a smile and a gleam of her eyes. "Yes, now let me." Mitsuo's hands swirled around his pockets, and his eyes went wide. He left his library card at home. "What's wrong, Mitsuo?" Risa said, walking by with a stack of books in her hands. "My library card, I forgot it at home," Mitsuo said, sighing with frustration. There was no way he was going to leave the library now. The sun was setting, and that meant hungry Shiki would be after his neck. "Mitsuo, you can stay here at the library with me for a while to read. I am taking a night shift," Risa said with a smile. Mitsuo smiled at her. "Sure, I will," Mitsuo said. He knew it would be dangerous for him to go out at night and he knew Risu had a fear of being alone. Mitsuo sat down on the bench, reading his books quietly. Some people passed by him, some greeting him and some not. Mitsuo pulled out his new notebook to write important information that may prove useful against the evil Shiki. The library was nice and quiet until a text message on Mitsuo's phone went off, playing the Death Note theme song as the ringtone. "Mom, where are you at?" Mitsuo, "The library." "Mom, alright, be safe." Mitsuo, "Sure, Mom." Mitsuo smiled. His mother has been the only one who gotten through the Hiryota thing, and he was happy she was back. Mitsuo put his phone down as he went reading again. The book he was reading first was Blood's Curse, which was about the adventures of Van Helsing after Count Dracula and his minions, which was very cool. After this, I am gonna possibly start that anime Mikio has been bugging me to watch, Mitsuo said, remembering that Mikio wanted him to watch Helsing Ultimate. Mitsuo looked around the library to see many people from both Lower and Central Sotoba were here, and some students too. Kakaku Shima and Kainoa from Lower Sotoba High School, Jota Urosaga and Noriyuki Kumamoto from Class 3 from his school, and Miha Fujimaki and Koki Mizuno who were from Class 2. Time went by, until only Risu and him were in the library. It was 1 in the morning. "How's it going on that book, Mitsuo?" Risa asked him. He smiled at the red-haired girl. "It's going great." Mitsuo smiled happily. "That's good to hear." Risu was cut off as the power to the library went out. Mitsuo started to look around and Risu was laughing nervously. "It's an old building. I am sure things like this happen a lot," she said with a nervous laugh. Mitsuo searched his bag, finding his LED flashlight he got for his birthday. Scratch, scratch. Sounds echoed throughout the library from outside. Risu clung to Mitsuo. "What? Is that sound?" she said, her voice starting to shake. "I am not sure," Mitsuo said. Risu followed behind him carefully. Mitsuo's flashlight shined on the doors, which were shut because the library was closed. Mitsuo's heart almost stopped when he saw red pupils glaring at him hungrily. What is that?" Risu's voice was no more than a squeak, and Mitsuo whispered to her. "Do you have an emergency exit here, Risu?" Mitsuo asked her as the scratch sounds increased their speed and Risu started to panic. It should be behind the desk," she said as Mitsuo grabbed her hand and ran behind the desk. Crashing sounds from the glass windows erupted the room and Mitsuo and Risa looked up. 2 Shiki males stared at them. "Ah, look at this Shigeru, fresh meat," the younger-looking, blonde-haired male said with a smirk. "I have never tried red-headed meat before, have you?" Dai Shijiro, who was a middle-aged Shiki with brown hair and a mustache, said with hungry eyes. Risu and Mitsuo pushed the desk more and more, little by little, and the exit was being uncovered slowly. More Shiki crashed through the windows, and Mitsuo and Risu struggling to get in the exit. Mitsuo froze. He knew that voice. It was Ryota. You would be glad to know I saved a space for your precious little neck, you worthless scrap, Ryota said, his eyes glaring at Mitsuo, who was climbing in the exit. Risu quickly followed along. The exit was a part of the vents that was unused for a long period of time, now used as an escape route. Let's go, Mitsuo said to Risu as they crawled through. Mitsuo could see the exit. Risu screamed and Mitsuo looked back to see Dai grabbed Risu by her leg. Take this, she said as she kicked his face with her free leg. Dai blacked out, and Risu crawled faster. Mitsuo reached the metal gate. Mitsuo kicked the gate open and crawled out, looking back to help Risu out. Let's go to my place, Mitsuo said as he and Risu ran as fast as they could. Mitsuo looked back to see Dai, Shijiro, Ryota, several Shiki he didn't recognize, and Hikaru's sister, Shinetsu. She was muttering something as tears dripped down her eyes. She muttered what may have been, "Save me, please." Mitsuo couldn't help but look at her until she was out of sight. What are those things, Mitsuo? Risu said as she ran with him. Mitsuo stared to say, vampires, or as they are called, Shiki. Chapter 25, Hotaka joins, Ozaki's secret despair. Hotaka laughed. Mitsuo's story was absolutely crazy. There is no way vampires could exist. Are you a bit too old to believe in vampires? Hotaka Ozaki said with a laugh as Mitsuo, Yutaka, and Risu stared at him with disbelief. You kids are silly. Now if you excuse me, I have work to do, Hotaka said as Mitsuo looked at him. Dr. Ozaki, why don't you check Miss Inoshiki's pulse when you go up there? I am sure you will be surprised when you find out she has no pulse, Mitsuo said, and Hotaka looked back at him. You are starting to sound like my crazy dad, Hotaka said as he walked out, closing the door behind him. The orphanage was filled with many kids. One was a 6-year-old, orange-haired boy named Hotaka Kurosawa. Hotaka was abandoned as a child, left at the doorstep as a baby and was raised as an orphan, waiting on a parent to like him and pick him up. 6 long years gone by and he went on believing no one would ever want him or love him. It all changed when a middle-aged man named Toshio Ozaki, who was from the burned Sotoba village, came by. His wife was dead and he needed an heir to the Ozaki name. He had a tie between 3 boys, Hiraji Nakano, Sugo Sasaki, and Hotaka. Toshio soon chose Hotaka because he saw loneliness in the boy, and also Hotaka knew bits about medicine since Hotaka never wanted to reveal this to anyone else, but he had autism. Hotaka was loved like a true son and loved his adopted father a lot, but whenever a patient came by with a bug bite on the leg, Toshio shook like a leaf and had panic attacks on a regular basis as well as nightmares. Hotaka was taught about vampires being real, and Hotaka soon was bullied at school because everyone believed Toshio Ozaki was nuts. Toshio Ozaki told Hotaka he would tell him the whole story soon, but not yet. How crazy can your old man be? And it didn't help that Toshio Ozaki passed away a year ago thanks to a heart attack. How sad. Hotaka sat down beside his desk, opening the desk to see a notebook written to him by his father. What the? Hotaka said as he read it. Son, I am sorry about not telling you about the story. I didn't know if you would believe me, but trust me, this is real. It all started on a hot summer day. Hotaka went on reading everything he wrote. Hotaka cried at times, especially how his father staked his mother, a picture of her taped on the book. Hotaka wished he could have met Yauko. The story ended with a Sotoba fire and how Ozaki knew this was a useless fight, killing those he knew as friends and them trying to kill him. I never knew, Hotaka said, saddened by his father's story. Hotaka felt guilty. His father, who was tormented by this and the Shiki for all his life, and Hotaka believed he was insane. Maybe his father's theories were not all that fictional. Hotaka sat down on his chair, ruffling his orange hair from stress. Well, at least my old man did something right. Hotaka looked to see Emi staring back at him with the other doctors. Hotaka could see Naru Fukushima whispering something to Fumio Shinonum. "Doctor, is everything fine?" Haruya Mihata whispered to Hotaka, who gave a smile to her. "I just need one thing done from all of you." Hotaka sat up and opened his window, bright sunlight piercing through. His face was calm. "I need you guys to take blood samples from everyone in the village currently. I don't care if they refuse. I need samples immediately." Hotaka turned to Maoigami. The black-haired young man looked surprised at the doctor's sudden words. "Why, sir?" Fumio asked. The blonde's strawberry-red eyes were wide. Hotaka knew he had to be careful. If he told them his plan, things could turn bad if they became Shiki. "I need to check everyone in the village's blood to see if the illness has spreaded," Hotaka replied, and suddenly everyone had determination spreaded across their face. "Certainly, Doctor," Naru replied, the brown-haired man quickly grabbing supplies, Fumio following his friend's actions. Soon, Mao, Shiro, and Kaoru left the room, leaving Hotaka with Emi, his most trusted friend. "Emi, would you follow everywhere I go and whatever I do?" Hotaka held Emi's hand. The green-haired girl looked up at him, into his light blue eyes. "Of course. Your father saved me one time, and I would be willing to help with anything to repay that debt." Emi smiled as Hotaka led her to the main room. "My father's suffering will no longer be here," Hotaka whispered, to no one in particular. Chapter 26, Hotaka meets Tsuneko, New Alliance. The autumn air sent chills throughout Sotoba. Leaves fell with delicate care onto the floor around the village. A girl with jade-green eyes, dark aquamarine hair, and wearing a long kimono was walking by with her friend, a girl wearing a thick winter coat who had light gray eyes and dark red hair. "Kichiru, are you gonna be in the autumn festival play?" asked the kimono-wearing girl to her dark-haired companion. "Nah, I am just there to see you perform game. Besides, you are always the one to be given the honor of playing Haruka Fuwa, the main character." Kichiru smiled to her friend, Kame blushed from embarrassment. "Well, we all remember the time my father threatened the mayor with a bottle of baking soda and a rake when he chose Joe." Kichiru Noda and Kame Takimoto shuddered at Mr. Takimoto's threats and also Cho's terrible performance. "Yeah, I heard the council are trying to find replacement roles for the selfish maid, the sorcerer, and the dark beauty since Izanami-sen, Nobuyuki Ozo, and Meiko Hiratsuka died." Kichiru said, looking quite sad that they died before they fulfilled their roles in the play. "Yeah, I heard the maid will be Hotaru Maruyama and the dark beauty is going to be Kakakushima," Kame said, remembering seeing the girls at the library one time. Walking along the dirty path, Kame and Kichiru saw a figure walking by, short black hair in a bob cut and dark eyes with a hint of red in them. Despite the eyes not matching up, the girls remember the figure being Wichie Akazawa, a girl who worked part-time at the food mart in between Lower and Main Sotoba. "Hello Wichie? How is everything?" Kichiru smiled and waved at the girl. "Splendid, I just had a bite to eat. We all need to eat before we all go, after all." She smiled grimly at the two as she walked away. Kichiru and Kame looked puzzled. "Wait, didn't Wichie work at all last month?" Kame asked her friend. Kichiru's eyes went wide, realizing something was off. "Didn't Wichie die last month?" Kichiru asked. Kameho's face turned as white as a sheet of paper. "Yeah, she fell victim to that anemia." The girls realized something was not right. "We are going to keep this between us for now, Kame, mainly because no one would believe us, okay?" Kichiru whispered to Kame as the kimono girl nodded wildly. Quickly, without another word, they dashed to their homes, not even saying a word. Hotaka looked down. "It's been 3 days and all the samples have been taken. Funny thing was that all of the family members of the Inoshiki family tried to refuse to take blood. Well, this should be counted as evidence." He smiled as he checked a blood sample, one from Ko Inoshiki, and looked down at the blood sample of himself. "One drop of blood into Ko's own," Hotaka said quietly to himself. His father did this research before, so it should work if she was Shiki. Just this morning, Yashiko Araki passed away. If her family allowed him to keep her body, he would have seen if she would have rose, then he would kill her painlessly through decapitation. How much the Arakas have suffered, losing both their children in a matter of a month or two. He knew many families suffered, but seeing the horror and sorrow mixed into their faces made Hotaka feel bad. Just seeing Sumiko Araki hugging her husband, Sukitsune Araki, was terribly sad for Hotaka. "We are going to give her a funeral, just like our poor son, Shiji," Sukitsune muttered to his saddened wife. Sumiko just sobbed uncontrollably. Seeing Yoshiko's pale green eyes turned light gray, her whitish gray hair ruffled all around the pillow underneath her. Nyoko Yukimura sat beside her friend. Nyoko was Hera's little sister. She lost her best friend and her older sister in 1 month. Nyoko was well recognized with having golden eyes and light lavender hair tied in pigtails kept up in blue ribbons. She wore a crossover of clothing that resembled punk and sports clothing. Sir, is Yoshiko alright? Golden eyes filled with tears fell from the lavender-haired girl. Hotaka simply shook his head, giving her a sorrowful response. I need to go. Feed Michiki, okay? Nyoko ran out of the room. Michiki was a small blue pet bird that Yoshiko gave Nyoko for her birthday last year, and Michiki was a symbol of their friendship with one another. Giving Michiki food seems to be Nyoko trying to reach the last bits of life Yoshiko had. Hotaka sighed sadly. He remembered the time Michiki was introduced to the clinic. All the kids who were looking forward to appointments all loved to see how she groomed her feathers and flap her wings. Hotaka quietly filled out Yoshiko's death certificate and slowly went to collect the blood samples. Hotaka shook his head wildly, trying to wipe the flashback from his mind and looked down at Ko's blood sample. Alrighty then, here goes nothing, Hotaka said as he dropped a bit of his blood into Ko's own, and his hypothesis was correct. Ko's blood was feasting on his own and turning hers bright red like his. So, this is why they need blood, Hotaka thought, amazed at this feature. If my father is right, decapitation and stakes will kill them, Hotaka says to himself. He looked down and smiled. But unlike you, I will make sure they leave to the afterlife with a painless death. Hotaka says he sat down on his desk, writing with his office pen a notice. To all officials in Sotoba, I, Hotaka K. Ozaki, head doctor of the Ozaki Clinic, have found what has been going around Sotoba. If we meet at November 16th at 8:30 p.m., I will explain the situation and the matters we need to take. Thanks for your time, Ozaki, the note said as Hotaka put it in the envelope. Walking outside, he found his mailbox opened and a girl stood in front of it. She was someone he never seen before. She was wearing a dress that looked Lolita in fashion and had long, purple hair and dark eyes hinted with reddish brown. Hello Ozaki, I have been awaiting you, the girl said as she opened the mailbox for him. She smiled, the moonlight shimmered on her pale skin. Hello, Hotaka scratched the back of his head, unknown what to say to the girl. Sunako, I am Sunako Garashiki. Although I am sure you already know me, Sunako said and Hotaka's eyes went wide. You are Sunako? Hotaka said with an alarmed voice. I am sorry for what I did to the village all those years ago. I know everything I did is beyond unforgiveness, but you need to hear me out, Sunako says with hand motions telling him to calm down. Hotaka raised an eyebrow at the young Shiki girl but decided she must know something important. Sure, but if I found out you lie to me, expect a stake through your body, Hotaka says as Sunako nods. I know about these Shiki and you need me and my group to help you, and I know everything that these Shiki can do. Sunako started to explain. Hotaka looked at the violet-haired girl with a glare. Please Mr. Ozaki, Sunako said. Hotaka looked at her. Her face was full of worry. I promise if you let me help, I will leave Sotoba for good. Hotaka's eyes sparked at the compensation. He looked at Sunako who looked at him with hope in those blackened eyes. You promise? Hotaka says again. Sunako looks up at him with a clearly worried smile. Of course, I swear. Sunako looks at Hotaka who holds out his hand. Shake and we have the deal. If the deal is broken, I will stake everyone you have that are Shiki including yourself, Hotaka says as Sunako shakes his hand. Her face was washed off of any worry she had, now replaced with rays of hope. It's a deal, Sunako cheerfully exclaimed as she raced back to wherever she hid. Hotaka smiled, putting the letter in the mailbox. Hotaka couldn't help but wonder one thing. I wonder if Shiki and humans can live together in harmony, Hotaka thought, closing the mailbox. Chapter 27, Nobody believes in vampires. But doctor, your theory is completely crazy. Shigeru Mashita commented on Hotaka's belief in the Shiki. I have to agree with my husband. Why should we believe vampires exist? They are stories made for children who misbehave, not non-fiction. Yutsuko Mashita replies. Hotaka shook his head. All of the console was going against him now. "Hotaka, my boy, you were the one who took my daughter, Naoki, as your fiancé. And where is she?" "Gone." "So why should I believe that she could rise up as a member of the living dead?" The mayor, Mr. Shireen, stared hard at Hotaka, who held his head down in shame. "I wasn't able to save her, but I swear, open up the grave of Chio, Naoki, Yashiko, Chinatsu, anyone. You will be surprised when the grave is empty." Hotaka yelled at Mayor Shireen. Everyone looked at him with upset eyes, even Naoki's cousin, Satoko Ohira, and her best friend, Shinju Mikuni, looked at him with a gasp. "Enough with your theories, Doctor. Don't you think we had enough?" Mayor Shireen pointed to see the Mashita family glowering at him. Clearly they haven't gotten through with mourning their daughter, Chio. Hotaka looked down at his feet. Everyone lost family members the last 2 to 3 months, and still everyone is blaming him for their deaths and possible resurrection. "So, I am suggesting you have nothing else to say for us, Doctor," says Mayor Shireen's executive, Kanaka Seda. No I don't," Hotaka says, sighing as he got up. "I bid you all farewell for now, and I hope you all will realize the danger we are all in," Hotaka said as he quietly pushed his chair in and left the room silently. Hotaka looked to see Sunako sitting outside. She looked at him with big eyes. "So, how did it go?" she asks, which Hotaka shook his head. "They think I am crazy, turning out like my father," Hotaka admitted. Sunako sighed despite not being able to breathe. "They always think that vampires are fantasy when you can easily see from me standing here that there is more to them," Sunako says. Hotaka nods, knowing that Sunako was right. "Yeah, we need to really get everyone to become aware, just like how my father did to you." Hotaka leaned on a post, trying to not think about the meeting. "That reminds me, whatever happened to Dr. Ozaki?" Sunako asked Hotaka, who had blue eyes filled with sorrow as he looked at the violet-haired Shiki. "Dead. My father is gone," Hotaka muttered to Sunako. Sunako held her hands over her mouth. "But, he should still be clinging to life still. Roughly he would be around 70 or 80 years old," Sunako said. Hotaka shook his head. "Not when he got a heart attack." "I want to help, I really do, Sunako, but unlike my father, I will send the Shiki back less painfully compared to my father's ways," Hotaka told Sunako. She looked up at him with black eyes. "Really? How are you going to do that?" Sunako asked politely to the orange-haired young man. Hotaka looked at the young Shiki. "Decapitation? I will use stakes only on Ko since she started this, but if all of the villagers that were killed have came back, I will kill them quick and painlessly," Hotaka said to Sunako, who smiled softly. "But I should ask you something, Hotaka." Hotaka looked at Sunako as she was talking. "If any of the villagers or any Shiki that worked with Ko decide to come to our side, can they stay with my group? I mean, you villagers probably wouldn't want Shiki in the village," Sunako said with a hopeful look in her dark eyes. Hotaka nodded. "Of course. Honestly, I don't want to kill everyone, but if you can find them a home, I would be more than grateful," Hotaka said with a smile, and Sunako nodded with happiness. "Of course. In fact, me and Seishin have become close to owners of a hospital. Every month they ship us blood packets so we could drink. They give us enough blood to last us until the next batch arrives. So the Shiki we have will never go hungry." Sunako smiled, and Hotaka had to admire the young girl. She had figured out how to save most of his old friends, and Hotaka would be grateful. Hotaka sighed and got up. He looked at the sky. It was turning a bit blue. "You better hurry home, Sunako. The sun is about to come out." Hotaka walked off as he heard the young girl dash off to the forest. Her footsteps stopped and she turned to Hotaka. "By the way, tell Mitsuo that you have formed an alliance with me. He would be happy to know that you are going to help." Sunako smiled and ran back on her trail. Hotaka walked his own way, smiling for the first time in a while. "The time is nearing for a war," Hotaka said, shuddering. Chapter 28, Making Sense of Kurayami. November 17th, very chilling air drifted through Sotoba. Mitsuo was bundled, head to toe with a warm, sheep's wool coat. The haze from the morning sun glistened off the traces of frost. "And da-da, that is how you do a tightrope," Rika and I, showing off their circus acts to the two from Lower Sotoba, Harumi Okada and Wataru Sujii. Clapping for the duo, Rika and I bowed, as they practiced day after day of circus acts. "Their dream comes closer and closer." Mitsuo laughed. "I and Rika were wonderful performers, but unfortunately, circus performers barely come through Sotoba often." Harumi's light pink hair and aquamarine eyes were brightened up with the sun's cold rays. Mitsuo knew Harumi. She was close to a girl named Mayu Mikazuki, but Mayu and her family have recently went to Tokyo to visit family and attend a convention as a cosplayer. The sad thing was that Mayu was going to be gone until March, which will be a long while. Mayu attended school in Lower Sotoba and was a high school honors student who just graduated. She had pale pink eyes and long, bright orange hair that darkened to red at the end. She allowed Mika and her half-sister, Sanoka Tominaga, to care for her house while she was gone. Sanoka had dark brown hair streaked with black, light blue eyes, and was tall for being just 13, being around 4 foot 10 inches for her age. Harumi and Wataru clapped as Rika and I bowed. Wataru's long and dark brown hair was noticeably messy, possibly due to her parents working both night and day shifts at the bookstore and leaving Wataru to care for the house herself. Mitsuo looked down. The Shiki must have been the ones causing so much stress on families who work, Mitsuo thought, remembering Suzu, Yutaka's mother, coming home exhausted. Mitsuo tied his dark blue scarf around his neck. His uniform barely kept out much shivering cold air. Mitsuo walked along the dirt path, now littered with traces of early snow. "Hiya Mitsuo, how's the family?" Mitsuo looked behind him to see Shunaki Maihata, his half-brother. To explain, Mitsuo's mother used to be in love with a man named Jin Maihata before his father came into view. Jin was a ladies' man and gambled a lot, which, at the time, was something his mother thought she liked in a man. One day, his mother found out that Jin was spending all his money on gambling and beers and the family was becoming broke. Eventually, Nobuko left Jin for Mitsuo's father, Masumi Nitaga, after being thrown into the streets. There later was a trial in which to claim the custody of Eika and Shunaki. Eika was 6 and Shunaki was 1. Eventually, they were split. Eika went to live with her mother while Shunaki was to be cared for by his father. Later on, Shunaki was given to Nobuko's mother, who lived in Osaka, Japan, after Jin ditched the child for a life of wastefulness. Shunaki, now 21, has gained a home in Sotoba where he can be close to his mother and sister while living peacefully. Despite not being blood-related, Masumi still treats Shunaki like a son and Mitsuo was treated like a brother. You couldn't tell if they were not even related. Shunaki had messy brown hair that almost resembled Mitsuo's, except it was lighter and shorter. He also recently cut the bridge of his nose with a kitchen knife accidentally and has a band-aid over it, sort of resembling the scar across Mitsuo's nose bridge. Also, Shunaki has emerald green eyes, just like Masumi, except Masumi's is a bit more pale in color. Everything is good, Shunaki. Mitsuo smiled at his half-brother, who smiled at him. That's good. I am just waiting for my friend, you know, Kin Arizawa. Mitsuo smiled as Shunaki mentioned Kin. She is the grocery store owner's daughter and a very kind young woman to the family. If I had to pick between Ryota and Kin, I would go with Kin by a long shot. Mitsuo muttered to himself so Shunaki didn't hear. Shunaki walked with Mitsuo until they both heard someone running towards them. Shunaki, over here. Mitsuo and Shunaki looked behind him to see Kin, all in a blue tank top, brown yoga pants. Her reddish mahogany eyes focused on them and her long, bright orange hair swayed in the wind. Kin, hey! Shunichi happily waved and shouted to her. His smile was brightened as he saw her, making Mitsuo real happy for him. Hey Mitsuo, see ya. Shunaki waves to him and runs back to Kin. Mitsuo smiled as they took another route to jog. Mitsuo walked. The frosty dirt road to school was hard to see now, but he knew the way. A shady figure was leaning against a tree and staring at Mitsuo. He looked at the figure in surprise. Kurayami was leaning against the tree. Her winter-inspired gothic Lolita outfit was now equipped with red mittens. Kurayami, Mitsuo said, and the blue-haired Jinru looked back at him. Oh, Mitsuo, I didn't expect you to be here, Kurayami says with the sound muffled with something in her mouth. What is in your mouth? Mitsuo asked the Jinru, who held up a small box saying I deign sushi. With the smell of sushi and teriyaki overwhelmed the box. Since I am Jinru, I can eat regular foods. Wanted to try this out before I need to refill my body with blood, Kurayami said, swallowing before putting another mouthful of teriyaki into her mouth. Mitsuo smiled at the girl. She was mysterious in so many ways. Her goal, her origins, even her name was unknown to him. Dr. Ozaki had formed an alliance with Tsuneko. Kurayami spoke with a quiet voice and Mitsuo's brown eyes were widened. He believes us now, Mitsuo said while Kurayami nodded. Her pale, cloud blue eyes looked down at her lunch. a smile on her face. I remember hearing about Sunako's plans back a long time ago. Many Shiki wondered if they should join her or leave her. Kurayami ate another bite of sushi. Only a few joined Sunako in her plan, but many stayed behind, not wanting to waste time or their lives on a dream. Kurayami said, her voice was slightly muffled with the food in her mouth. When Sunako and Seishin fled from the village, many Shiki and Jinru laughed at Sunako's failure, me included. Kurayami said, swallowing silently. So many Shiki lost their lives when Sunako invaded. Chizuru Garashiki, Megumi Shimizu, Nao Yasamari, Dakotoshi Hirasawa, Datsumi, even a rebel Jinru named Natsun Oyoki even lost his life. Kurayami said with a frown at the lost lives. That's a lot. Mitsuo responded, unsure of what else he could have said. Kurayami, what made you help us and Sunako out? Surely you would have kept your life and stayed away knowing what happened in the past. Mitsuo asked. The Jinru? Kurayami looked at him. After hearing about Ko and her girls doing the same and hearing about Sunako trying to prevent her mistake from happening, and since I knew what these people, the Inoshikas, were capable of, I had to join in. Kurayami explains. Mitsuo looked at the young girl with awe. You have more bravery than I would have expected from a girl your age. How old are you? 15? Mitsuo asked Kurayami. She smiled. Yes, physically, but I am actually 200. Mitsuo's mouth gaped wide when Kurayami admitted her real age. Well, I know I asked you this a long while ago, but Kurayami, that doesn't sound like your real name, Mitsuo said. Kurayami looked at him. The name, Kurayami, means darkness. Why would you pick it? Mitsuo asked her, and the blue-haired girl looked at him. Kurayami is the name I go by now. I lost my real name long ago. I still remember it, but it leaves a scar on my past. I picked Kurayami because that's what we are, Jinru or Shiki. We all live in the dark, Kurayami said with a slight smile. I am not very fond of questions, Mitsuo. Sorry, but I will reveal my true story to you soon. Kurayami looked at him with a saddened smile. Mitsuo nodded in understanding. If you wish to know badly, I told Sunako, Kurayami said, and Mitsuo stood. I would rather be more happier listening to you, so I will wait for the proper time. Mitsuo smiled slightly as he headed to school. Kurayami stood. She pulled out a small piece of paper. It was her name. Quietly she muttered it. Sa-ra-ki-o-an. She said so no one made it out. Chapter 29, Running Out of Time. Kaneka Seda, the executive to Mayor Fujimaro Shirane, wearing her black dress despite the wintry conditions the night has brought. Why are all the staff from the office always work at night? Kaneka asked herself while a shape was approaching her from the distance. It was a beautiful young woman who wore a gothic Lolita-styled outfit. She walked. Her light blue hair and pale skin were nearly glimmering in the night. Ah, Izanami-sen, what are you doing out here so late at night? Kaneka asked the gothic girl. Only 14 and she was walking very late. It had to be roughly 1 in the morning. Morning, Miss Seda. I was going home to get something to eat. Izanami smiled so innocently that Kaneka couldn't help but smile at the young teen. Well, be careful not to catch cold, Kaneka said to her as they passed. Certainly, ma'am. Izanami smiled as she walked by. Kaneka smiled at the young girl until Kaneka froze in her tracks. Wait a minute. Izanami is dead. She died back in October. Kaneka's light brown eyes went wide as hands, colder than the ice of the wintry night, grasped onto her shoulders. Oh dear, you figured it out. Well, I can't leave you out here. How about a snack? Izanami said as Kaneka froze, blood from her neck draining as Izanami forced her fangs deeper into her neck. Kaneka soon passed out from the draining of blood and onto the cold dirt path. Sorry miss, but we need to keep our secrets, just for a little longer, Izanami said as, a figure in the shadows, older woman, about nearly 50, walked up to Izanami, clapping. Well done, Izanami. You are a skilled hunter and a perfectly good actress as well, the woman said, and Izanami bowed. This woman was Kimi Sundori, the most trusted advisor to the Inoshikas. Shall I go see Ko about this victim? Izanami asked the elder Shiki, who shook her head. I will go for you. It's best if I were to tell her after all. Kimi smiled and Izanami walked along with the elder, feeling victory thud her chest rapidly. Village news. Konica Saya collapsed with anemia. Some girls ways away from Konica did too. Girls named Kohaku Umeki and Aiko Katil also fell victim to the sickness. Stay safe and away from contamination, people. The news rings as Mitsuo was watching the news with Kotone and her family. Whoa, it's gotten worse, hasn't it? Kotone muttered. Her parents, Haruka and Atsushi Idane, looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Well, that's a shame really. Mitsuo and Kotone looked to see Miss Momoe Aiko. Reiko and adoptive mother was in the house. Excuse me dears, Miss Idane wanted me to get my blender back after she used it. Momoe smiled as she put her blender in her shopping bag to carry it. Mitsuo and Kotone giggled happily. Miss Momoe Aiko always acted like everyone's grandmother and mother. In fact, she was indeed the third oldest villager in Sotoba. I hope everything is fine, Momoe Haruka says with a smile, and Momoe laughed. I am sure everything is fine, she says as she walked out. Kotone, we closed the sushi shop early today. I hope everything is alright for you, Atsushi said to Kotone, who nodded happily. I just hope that Amaya Terada is alright. She loves training with her friend Moriko Nara at this time, Kotone said, looking at the clock that said 9:45 p.m. Mitsuo nodded. He remembered Amaya and Moriko. They were always training hard, running up the hills of Sotoba, swimming, and all sorts of sports. Mitsuo could understand that it would be worrisome, knowing that Shiki are attacking people at night. Moriko and Amaya are very vulnerable at this time. Those two remind me of those four boys. Shiji used to be one of them, but now he is gone. Were their names Rokuro Yamazaki, Mamoru Fujii, and Arachi Sakamoto? Haruka asked Kotone, and she nodded happily. Yeah, I remember them. They normally train around Sotoba, getting prepared for the Olympics, they say. Kotone made a cute giggle, thinking about those boys. Well, tomorrow we will deliver sushi to them. They had an order for tomorrow and we should be getting it for them. Kotone, do you wanna meet them? Atsushi asked his pink-haired daughter. She smiled with glee. Of course, I would love to meet them, Kotone said with a big smile and large, aquamarine eyes. Mitsuo had to laugh. Kotone's enthusiasm was always a sight to see, and with Shiki roaming around, all the enthusiasm is all he and everyone needs. Mitsuo was about to figure out all he needs to know about Kurayami. Kurayami was mysterious, but she would be a strong ally against these horrid people. Seishin and Sunako were kind and had helped them out for a while, gathering intel and everything. Even Sunako told Mitsuo enough about her story for him to trust her. But all the things bothering him led up to how he should expose the Inoshikas being vampires. It would be difficult to stage a reveal, but he would have to be with Hotaka in order to plan things out. Mitsuo remembered Kotaro. He has been visiting Hidataro for a while and always seems to tell him how much better he looked after Sunako took care of him. He must have been getting the right nourishment our blood gives him. He no longer has gray around his eyes from weakness. Kotaro smiled at Mitsuo. He would return it too, but Mitsuo had to smile at Kotaro struggling to start a conversation to Kane and Kakaku. Hidataro has been roaming his mind, and trying not to spoil Shiki were real to them was a hard mission. Everyone would believe he is crazy if he was running around saying vampires were real. Mitsuo laughed to himself. Mitsuo knew time was slipping. Chapter 30, the name that time took away. Mother, father, I found something cool. A young girl pointed to a small ladybug. Two adults, a blue-haired, fancy young woman and a sophisticated man smiled. What a wonderful find, dear, her father said as he patted her head. The girl smiled happily as she looked at her parents, her little sister clinging onto her mother's hand. Soon, the green grass was sprayed with blood and the sky darkened to a hellish black. Mother, father, Shun, where are you? The girl cried out loud as a man with black and red eyes licked his lips at the blue-haired girl. Sadly for you, they haven't seen the light of another day, and so will you, he said as he snapped his fangs. Kurayami awoken in her makeshift bed. She shook her head. Her cheek was wet from crying. Mother, father, Shun, I am so sorry, Kurayami muttered silently to the other Shiki, who still were asleep in their coma-like state. Couldn't hear. Kurayami looked at her hands, seeing them shiver from her nightmare. I need to tell them eventually, Kurayami said, remembering what Sunako said about her name. That's a pretty name. Sunako smiled at Kurayami. The Jinru shook her head. It reminds me of my pain from my older life. Kurayami looked down with sorrow in her pale blue eyes. Sunako cocked her head. I have always been Sunako, despite all the things I have gone through. But I understand that it is painful hearing something that reminds you of a past event. Sunako explains, remembering how it was stuck in that cabin, forced to feed on the innocent lives of servants. Kurayami looked at Sunako and gave a gentle smile. Sunako, can you keep my secret? Kurayami asked the young Shiki, who smiled innocently at Kurayami. Of course, after all, Kurayami is what you go by now. Sunako stood up, pouring some tea in a cup. I trust you, you know that, Kurayami? Sunako asked her. The Lolita girl looked at Sunako. Yeah, and I am starting to trust you too, Sunako. Kurayami saw Sunako give a sweet smile as she handed her a teacup. I am glad I never had a true friend like you before, Kurayami. Except for Seishin, Sunako said with a small giggle. Kurayami listened to Sunako and looked at the Shiki girl with amazement in her eyes. You think of me like a friend? She asked with surprise written on her face. Of course I do. Kurayami smiled at Sunako. Soon, after a minute or two had passed and Kurayami stood up. I am gonna go and see if I could find a place to relax outside, Kurayami said while Sunako nodded. That's fine, you do need all the rest and relaxation you need because I sense that this war will come anytime soon, Sunako said with a worried look on her face. I remember the stories that all the Jinru and Shiki tell about the village. You know more than anyone how this stakeout will be like, Kurayami said with a nervous look at Sunako. Chizuru, Sunako said, looking at the room where the memorial stone was placed. Even after all these years, Sunako never gotten over Chizuru, Yashi, and Datsumi's deaths. The blows were hard and unpleasant. They will forever be in her memory like a unhealed scar. Kurayami knew how that felt, but in due time, she will reveal her story to everyone. Sunako watched as Kurayami slowly walked away. Both of them knew what to do. Kurayami looked down at her hands, finally stopped shaking. The Jinru looked at the calendar in her room. It was November 22nd. Today is the day that— No, I can never remember that day. Kurayami held her head and looked up at her door to see Mitsuo, Risu, and Yutaka standing to see her. Kurayami, what's wrong? Risu asked the blue-haired Jinru, who simply looked down. The day is here, she muttered. It was silent but not silent enough to be heard by the three teens. What day? Mitsuo asked Kurayami, and she looked up at the brown-haired boy. If she had to tell her story, now would be a good time to do such. Kurayami is Summit. Yutaka was cut off by Kurayami. No, my real name is not Kurayami, she started. Everyone looked at her, eyes widened. She looked at them all, her pale eyes gazed from Mitsuo, to Risu, to Yutaka. She needs to learn that they may accept her. My real name is Sakurako. Sakurako Kissho-an, Kurayami said. Chapter 31, The Secret Life of Sakurako Kissho. Sakurako Kissho-an, a young girl living in the 19th century with dreams and ideals that she wants to achieve. After all, it is the human race that has this trait. The Kissho-an family were close to many rich figures. In fact, her father was an inventor and her mother was an actress for plays. Shizu and Takayao Kissho-an, Sakurako's beloved parents. They had another daughter named Shin who looked more like her father than her older sister and mother. Shin had black hair and dark orange eyes, a trait her father has. Sakurako normally wore these beautiful and long frilly dresses. She normally wore black dresses. She didn't know why, but black with white lace suited her well. Sakurako dear, we are going to a big party. You all ready, dear? Her mother, Shizu, called for her from downstairs. Sakurako raced down the stairs. I am here, mother, Sakurako said as she ran down to see her beloved mother. Shizu smiled at Sakurako. Shizu smiled as she held her daughter close to her. My sweet 15-year-old girl. Shizu smiled as she and Sakurako walked to the place where the party took place. Her father and Shin were there already because they were in charge of preparations. Hey, it's Kurayami. Sakurako rolled her eyes. It was her friend, Tano Suknijo. For the final time, Tano, my name is Sakurako. She countered him and he laughed. Kurayami means darkness and so do your clothes. He laughed as he walked away. Sakurako glared at him. Nothing is wrong with black. Sakurako looked at her dress, still kinda mad at Tano. She and Tano were friends as young children, mainly because their parents were trying to get them to wed when they were older. They were friends, but at times they couldn't stand each other. Shiam also was to wed a young man named Ashihai Hakama, but unlike Tano and her, at least Shin and Ashihai actually like each other. Sakurako actually did like Ashihai. He was nice and very kind to her family. Even his family were kind to her and Shin when they visited. Sakurako looked around. So many people elegantly dressed, some drinking some tea, having some cake, and were chatting away in some occasional laughter. Sakurako was pretty amazed. "Hello young lady, would you like to dance?" A man about in his 20s looked down at Sakurako and she giggled. "Certainly, sir." Sakurako watched as his hand held hers. "The name is Kagetoki Hamahana." She smiled, looking up at the man. Sakurako kissed Sho and Sakurako introduced herself, soon realizing that Kagetoki's hands were icicle cold, probably from being out in the snow. Kagetoki had pitch black, shoulder-length hair and his eyes were amazing. The pupils were black with red around. It was the most interesting color she ever seen in someone's eyes. Kagetoki was smiling at Sakurako. She was happy to be dancing with him. Her parents looked at her with a smile. "Ah, isn't that Mr. Hanahama?" Takayao smiled happily. Shizu was eating a slice of cake, happily watching her daughter. The man then held her close to him, his face near her neck. "Mister, what are you doing?" Sakurako asked, and then it was too late. Sakurako tried to scream, fangs digging into the flesh of her neck, her blood being absorbed into his body. Instantly, people saw something was wrong and Kagetoki released her from his grip and he crashed through the window of the home. He was a Shiki, and he had claimed the life of Sakurako Kisho-an. "I don't know what to do, ma'am. Your daughter seems to be in some sort of daze." The local doctor examined Sakurako. The girl's pale blue eyes were darkened with sickness. "Sleepy, very, very sleepy," Sakurako muttered as she went to sleep. The doctor looked at the young girl. "I suggest to examine her every day, let her sleep and make sure she has enough nutrients in her body," the doctor said to Shizu who was crying softly. The doctor packed his bag and left. Takayao walked to Shizu who was holding Shun close to her. "Well, the police were trying to track down Hamahana," Takayao said to his wife who looked at him. "They caught him, right?" She looked at her husband, as if begging him to help Sakurako. "No, but here is when it gets more crazy," Takayao said to his wife. "Mr. Hamahana died a week before the party. His gravestone was up and everything." Shizu broke down. She bawled her eyes and Takayao patted her back. Shun looked down at her sickened sister. "Sakurako, be alright," she said with such worry. Shun always brought some people and friends to see Sakurako, even Tano showed up to see her. Sakurako, I am so sorry," Tanosuke said to her. She looked at him weakly, giving him a smile. "I knew one day you would call me by my real name," she said, huffing with every breath she took. Tano gave her a smile, but his eyes gave her tears. He couldn't have stopped Kagetoki, even if he tried. Shun tried to cheer him up, but the damage was already done. Ashihai stopped by after Tanosuke visited. He had tears in his eyes too. "Sakurako, we may have talked a few times but, I never got to actually know you," Ashihai said with sadness for her. Sakurako looked at him with a faint smile. "I am just glad you are here to see me." Sakurako smiled weakly as she went back to sleep. Shun led Ashihai to the kitchen to have a bite to eat. Sakurako saw many people from the party come by to visit, but every time it was the same. Sakurako went to sleep. Sakurako was instantly terrified at night because he showed up. Kagetoki walked into her room and drained her even more. Eventually, it happened. Jai-Akshin screamed when she was delivering breakfast to Sakurako, her eyes grayed and lifeless, and her skin as pale as a bedsheet. Sakurako Kisho-an was dead. "Shun, what happened?" Her father raced and soon he gasped. Shun had her hands covering her mouth, eyes filled with tears, and shaking with fear and sadness at the body of her older sister. The day was spent in mourning. Shizu never left her room. "How can this happen? She had a life ahead," her father said with sadness in his orange eyes. Shizu ordered for a proper funeral for their precious daughter. Shizu held Sakurako sadly. "My precious daughter, my sweet daughter," Shizu cried softly. Funeral day passed and soon, Sakurako was left in her coffin, lonely and cold. Sakurako moved about and her eyes opened. They flashed black and red. She screamed helplessly as she tried clawing out of her coffin. "Mother, father, Shun, Tano, Ashihai, anybody help," she screamed as she dug her nails countless times into the wood of her coffin. Some men opened up her coffin and stared at her wide-eyed. "I thought she was dead," one man said. "Yeah, she was supposed to be dead so we could steal her riches," another said. And Sakurako knew what they were. They were grave robbers. "Well, sorry about that," she said as she stood up, looking to see her jewelry and dresses all piled up in her coffin. "But thanks for opening that dreaded thing up," Sakurako said as she was gathering her belongings. Her favorite bag was in here too, which made things easy for her. What are you, a phantom, demon, vampire? The silent thief said, and the word struck her. Vampire, Hamahana. He must be vampire, Sakurako said. She walked off. Sorry to disturb your hunt, boys, Sakurako said as she walked away. She looked to see her home. Her family will be waiting for her. They will know what happened and why she was in a coffin. Mother, father, Shun, Sakurako called, and soon she heard a footsteps approaching to see Shun. Shun looked at Sakurako and soon flashed a massive smile. Sakurako, she leaped at her sister. The two embraced for the first time in a while. It's a miracle. This is an extraordinary find, the doctor told Shizu while giving Sakurako a checkup. Your daughter, she is alive, but there are some oddities in her blood, the doctor tells her mother. Sakurako looked concerned. What is in her blood, sir? Shizu asked the kind doctor. Her blood seems to have transformed to crave for blood as well as normal food, the doctor said, which had Shizu and Sakurako have wide eyes. Blood? Sakurako asked him, which the man grabbed a small scalpel. Giving himself a clean and small cut on his arm, his blood poured down into his hand, which he showed to Sakurako. Before Sakurako could think, her eyes went black with red irises and she was licking at the blood. Feeling the blood slither down her throat was making her crave for so much more. Shizu looked at her daughter with a disturbed face on and cried silently. That man, Hamahana, he did this to my precious daughter. She cried silently. Sadly, I think so. Your daughter is a daylight vampire, the doctor said. Shizu cried again. That night, Sakurako was reading through all her books. She had a book about mythical creatures, which may have what she had become. Apparently, she had become a Jinru? The daylight vampire as what the doctor called it. She read on. A Jinru is like a vampire. They feed on blood and have excellent night vision and inhuman powers. But these creatures are living and not a part of the undead. And unlike real vampires, these creatures can eat normal food and can walk around during the day. Sakurako read on until she closed her book. Sakurako stayed in her room with the curtains down. Her parents were trying to keep Sakurako's reanimation a secret. Sakurako was normally kept in her room and was given blood in a cup every once a week. 2 weeks she has been living like this. She knew from the talks in the other rooms that Tenosuke was getting suspicious. Sakurako knew that her parents loved her very much, and if the secret were to be revealed, Sakurako may be killed or her family killed. Everyone was still on the lookout for Hamahana. Sakurako was hearing an argument in the main room. It was her father arguing with the doctor. Circus Shoan, hand your daughter over. Imagine she will be the living proof that life after death is true, the doctor madly exclaimed. Sakurako gulped. No, we cannot let you do that, doc. You promised us that you will keep her existence a secret. Sakurako walked down. Terror filled her body with every step she took. I did, right after we sell her to research facilities and make us rich beyond our beliefs. Takayao glared at the doctor, who smiled with madness consuming his brain. How could you? Her father lunged at the man, both throwing punches at each other until Shun and Shizu tore at the two men, trying to break them apart. You see, if you don't give her to me, you will meet your fate right here. The doctor pulled out a small handgun. A smirk danced on his face. Goodbye, Circus Shoan. He aimed the gun at his head until Sakurako leaped in front of her father. Dad, no, she said as the bullet blasted most of Sakurako's head off. Blood and brain matter splattered behind her and some bits of it fell all over the people in the room. Sakurako, her family screamed. She fell on her side. Her body was bloodied and broken. The doctor didn't know what to think. Looks like she is dead for sure. Not for my research anymore, he said as he walked away. His smile faded as he walked back at the house. The family kneeled down to see Sakurako. She was dead, or so they thought. Sakurako's remaining eye opened and she lifted herself into the air. She moved like a puppet with a few strings cut. Shun screamed as Sakurako got up. Her head was healing quickly. That night, Sakurako packed her bags. Her parents and Shun were filled with such sadness. I cannot stay here. I will bring danger to you. I must go. Her family hugged her and watched her leave. Sakurako ran away. She changed her name. She wanted either Sakura, Tora, or Usagi, but then a certain name rang in her ears. Kurayami. The one to know named her and she kept it. Kurayami was Jinru and was not welcomed anywhere. Where can she go now? Chapter 32, Epidemic Strikes the School. Kurayami Sakurako kissed Shoan, explained to the three teens who had their eyes widened. I knew my family was dead after years of roaming. I even met Shin 1 year. She was in her 80s and dying. She was happy to be reunited with me and I watched as she slipped away, Sakurako said, looking down at her cup of water. Sadly, turns out she ended up marrying Ashihai and had a daughter named Umeko. Tenosuke married a young lady named Reika Shinihara, giving them 2 daughters that Teno named after me. There was Sakurako and then there was Kurayami. Sakurako had tears streaming down her face at the thoughts of the life she could have lived with Teno. Sakurako, I am so sorry to hear that, Risa said with sadness in her voice. Sakurako turned to look at the teens. A smile fluttered on her face. It's a reason I am fighting. My story could repeat itself on others. I cannot let that happen. She stood up, facing the others. I have been called many horrible names through the years I have been around. Freak, cannibal, witch, even been nicknamed vampiress by many. Sakurako looked behind him and smiled. I wish for you three to keep referring me to as Kurayami. Like I said, Sakurako Kiss Shoan is the name I lost. Sakurako is dead but Kurayami is around. She ended her message. Sure Kurayami, Yutaka said. He was the one who ended up crying halfway through the story. Kurayami looked up to see Sunako was there on the steps, her head tilted and a mouth that had been opened thanks to a gasp she must have had. You heard my story again, Sunako? Kurayami looked at the Shiki girl who nodded. Only halfway in though, but it still is a tragic tale, Sunako said as she walked away, possibly to see if Seishin got the book she asked for. Sunako told Mitsuo her story a while back. He couldn't choose which story was more saddening, Kurayami's or Sunako's. Sunako, I collected the book you wanted from the library, Seishin said to Sunako, holding a purple book which gave Sunako a smile up in her face. Thanks dear Seishin. It will be pleasing to know what we could use to stop the rivals, she says as she walks to the door. Mitsuo, I want you to continue your research on the Inoshiki family and who they victimized. I got Hotaka Ozaki on with documenting who they bit and who has died. Maybe then we could find out how many rose and how many didn't so far, Sunako says as she runs off to her reading quarters of the cabin to read the book in pure silence. Mitsuo walked along the dirty trail towards the school, thinking silently to himself. I know that main Sotoba had many deaths, but I really wonder how many have been affected in lower Sotoba, he says silently, remembering that time when Kotaro was trying to feed Hidadara. Mitsuo was walking to school, bag in hand. He walked in the school to see everyone standing outside, looking extremely horrified. What happened? Mitsuo yelled out loud to see Kotone was crying silently, Hikaru had a shocked face, and Mayo was incredibly horrified. Take them to the clinic pronto. Hotaka Ozaki commanded some of the staff of the school, carrying Shizuko, Mayo's little sister and Dayu Tomohashi, the class 3 teacher out of the school. Shizuko, Shizuko, Shizuko. Mayo yelled H to her little sister, fear and sadness enveloping her emotions. Shizuko was horribly pale, her green eyes dark with illness, her breathing was shallow. Mitsuo knew immediately she must have been bitten by the shikis. Me-ho, Shizuko muttered silently, her usually bright and joyful features were destroyed by illness, leaving her as a shell filled with depression and death. Hotaka shook his head sadly. She is one of the youngest who were infected, just 15, he says with anger in his voice, almost blaming himself for her infliction. Dayu Tomohashi was no better, looking more ill and sickly than Shizuko. He looked like he was being embraced by death itself. Mr. Dayu was a teacher for 11 full years, and now at age 43, it's hard to lose a older teacher. Who is gonna take Mr. Tomohashi's place as class 3's teacher? Mikio said to Mitsuo, who shrugged. Even if they get a replacement, they would not be same as Mr. Tomohashi. He was my teacher when he taught 2nd grade, Hikaru said, looking distraught. First he lost his mother and sisters, now his favorite childhood teacher. What would Hikaru think when he finds out Chinatsu rose from the grave? Mitsuo thought to himself, thinking of all the dread and guilt that would break Hikaru if that were to happen. Mayo chased after the people carrying Shizuko, trying to see her sister again. Listen up students, Mr. Aimu yelled out. All the students turned to face him. School is done for the day until we can find a replacement teacher for Mr. Tomohashi. Until then, my students shall do their research paper on the history of Sotoba. Reniko's students in class 2 will do their math quizzes at home. Class 3 will do their literature homework, Hideyoshi Aimu yelled out. The students all were shocked. There hasn't been a time they were dismissed from school like this. What is happening to Sotoba? One of Mr. Tomohashi's students, a blue-haired girl named Marina Teshimizu, falls to the floor and panics. Her friends from her class, Ganaka Sakura and Nishoko Totoro, helping her back on her feet and patting her back, saying words that can try to relax her. It took a few moments until Nishoko held Marina close, the lavender-haired young woman getting